Hey everybody, we'll start this meeting. Thank you. Welcome to the Operations Committee meeting. And welcome David, our Lifelines Director, who's beside me. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, we have an apology from Councillor Dowsing. Thank you.
Councillor Dowsing, thank you. And we've got Councillor Wharahinga on Zoom, I believe. Morena, Josh.
Morena.
Seconded, right. Okay, any declarations of interest? Okay, well, we'll go straight to page 5, the confirmation of non-confidential minutes. Moved by Bill, seconded by Terry. All those in favour? We might start with a karakia. Thank you, Andy. Sorry. Yeah, we'll kick off with a karakia. My apologies.
All right, thank you. No mai haere mai kia koutou, kua tai mai nei mō tēnei hui. Mihi atu ki manihiri ki koutou marunga Zoom hoki. E harahau e te tangata tino mohia ki te kōrero I te reo Māori. O te rā, e pirangi au ki te kōrero I te reo Pākehā me te reo Māori. I'm not an expert at speaking the Māori, but I think it's a good thing to do in both languages so that people get a fuller understanding of what is being said. Anei taku karakia. Tau tukuhia tēnei hui. Tau tukuhia tēnei rōpū. Support this meeting and the group that have come together for it. Tuku atu a mātou whakaaro, ki a mātou whānau hurina I te motu, hurina I te ao huriuri. Send our thoughts out to our families who are here in this country and around the world. Kōrero nia, ngā kaupapa o te wā. Support our discussions, the discussions of our time. Arahina na whitiwhiti kōrero ki wānui a mātou. Guide the discussions we'll have between us. Arahina na whitiwhiti whakaaro kai wānui a mātou. Guide our understanding of the discussions we have together. Arahina na pātai, arahina na ture nei. So guide our questions and as we follow our rules and processes. And kua puta ai te marama so that we all understand going forward. Tihau mauri ora. This is the essence life. Had to use notes. I've just found that going from one to the other is quite difficult, but getting there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Your worship.
Yes, I have an interest to declare. Item 10.2.4, the Peel Street toilets. My sister is the architect working on that project.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go straight to the action sheet on page 9. Okay, still, yeah.
There's a note in there about the states that it will be the same size and style of the I do note Catchment gardens are about 12 acres and that much land available, so I'm just concerned about setting an expectation which the state will be of the size of those two facilities. Sorry, Josh. When the area of those facilities is such that I doubt if we can meet the commitment of being the size of Adventure Playground and Botanical Gardens.
I thought it was to do with the playground area, not the actual area of the spaces.
Through you, Chair, the clarification, it was in regards to the playground equipment size, not the overall hectare size of the park, so we can amend that if you need.
Okay, clarified. We'll go on to the action sheet, page 9. Have we got any queries on the action sheet? Yes, Bill. Microphone, mate. Microphone.
Where we are. Where to from here up there?
So through you, Chair, for Ruatoria, we have got some testing underway on the bores for the Ngāta College bore and the Whakaroa Park bore. So we're working through, we want to pressure test them one more time. So we have got everything lined up to undertake the next pressure test that we'll do on the bore. So it's looking promising across those two bores, but we also need to do a condition assessment where we'll stick a camera down the bore to actually check that everything is as it should be down there. It was a lined bore that was put down for Ngāta College, but we need to make sure that that hasn't eroded at all. Once that's underway, we'll then be able to move forward. We've had a meeting with Whakaroa Park. Yes. So we've had a conversation with them about moving forward, which seems all to be going well. And we've got the contractors lined up for later on for this year. So our intention is to have that facility open by this summer.
Thank you. No more queries. We'll move on to page 12 for the governance work plan. Are any queries on that at all? We're happy. Yep. Okay. There's no leave of absence, acknowledgements and tributes. There are none. Public input and petitions. Kamara Donnelly on traffic calming, but I don't see him over here, so obviously he's forgotten or. Yeah. Okay. No worries. We'll move on. Extraordinary business. There's none. Notice of motion. There's none. Adjourned business. There's none. We'll go straight to page 16 for information reports on infrastructure services. March 22 emergency roading fund application and plan for delivery. Yay.
Can I just grab a clicker, please, Jill? Or Heather? So just while the team's loading that up, we've been obviously been hit pretty hard the last 12 months is how far I'd go back with what's been happening across our roading network. And part of the delay has actually been unpicking the different events that we've had across the network, because now the actual sites are starting to merge into one another. That's led to a fair bit of trouble for our contractors, but also for Uawa-Hikuwai when it comes to some of the funding of it, as to which event are we aligning that slip or dropout or drainage blockage to the point that it became, we had 7 different events that a slip could have been attributed to. So we worked with Uawa-Hikuwai to actually get rid of which event it was. We just agreed that it was an event that had happened, and that we've then had to go back through and recalibrate how big those slips, drops, slumps have been across the network. What I'd like to do this morning is just take you back to basics to show you how we've gotten to where we have and just what's been happening in the background, but then also look at the forward works program as to why what's happening across the network, because we know there's a lot of concern from the community about what is or isn't happening across the network and around the condition of the roads. Heather. Okay, so just quickly on the roading network. So we have got one of the biggest roading networks in the country by unsealed and by sealed. So we're talking about 1800 Ks, almost 1900 Ks of roading network. The other stuff I wanted to put up there was actually 413 bridges, which is quite a few for a small network of ours, for a small community of our side. But then also you've got 260 Ks of footpath, 3,703 street lights, 20 roundabouts, and 1 set of traffic lights. Now, the roading network, just to give you a bit of scale, you can see it is over 83% of council's infrastructure. So it's $1.6 billion worth of your infrastructure is just the roading network. And that's nearly double the average for unitary councils across the country. So we're very roading heavy when it comes to our infrastructure. And it is also quite fragile, as we all know. So take you back to the long-term plan. And the long-term plan was one of the first times, this one that we're going into now, and I've pulled some excerpts out of it to talk about what we agreed in the long-term plan and some of the pressures that we had on the last LTP. So going back almost 3 years ago when we were out for consultation, we had to prioritize the budgets for what we could afford in that LTP versus the roading need that was out there on the network. So in the plan, our asset management plan, I'll go right back to that. In the asset management plan, we said for the roading network to come back, we need another $161 million to get the roading network up. And we knew that our community could not afford that. So the community can't afford the need that was out there on the network. So we came back and we reprioritized the budgets after we went up for consultation and after you looked at affordability across the network as well. But in that long-term plan and in the consultation, we were upfront with the community that we knew that some of our roads were going to have to deteriorate given the funding budgets that we had. That also climate change was going to have a huge impact on our network as well because of what was happening, more frequent flood events. We've got an increase of forestry, but the central government had also said there was no more extra funding coming to us. And if you remember back, our funding assistance rate dropped as well. The community were quite clear. They wanted us to keep at the level of funding that we had. So it was either more funding was 47% or keep it at existing. And we had to budget the LTP in order to do that. But it did mean there's a bow wave coming, and that's in our asset management plan, our regional land transport plan, and the LTP, that all we've done is deferred these things out, that we still have that damage coming because we haven't been able to get on top of the work that needs to be done across the network. We haven't got the funding. Then we got hit, and we've been hit really bad. And I'm going to quickly whistle stop through, but the red was 700 mils of rain in under 7 days. And as you can see where it's hit, and no doubt for those who have been out in our southern part of the network, so that's Tairāwhiti, right around to Matawai, that's where those big red dots are. That's where there's a whole heap of damage. Same with Tokomaru Bay up there, Uawa, all through there. Those are our damaged areas on the network. And this was just the cyclone Dovi. So this is not anything else. It's just one event where we had that big hit of rain. And the network got hammered. And it was already getting hammered because we'd had a number of events. So this is back to June 2018. We've still got 1.8 million worth of flood repairs that needs to happen there. And I've deliberately put some pictures up so you can see that it's not us just not wanting to do the work. For us to undertake a whole new bridge abutment, it needs designs, it needs really good engineering. We have to do assessments as to what's going on. You can see the type of steel that we have to put in to actually drive in to a stream, where we need a resource consent, where we have to make sure we've got fish passage and all of those things. That steel plate there is going on over a hole so that they can work underneath it. So it's not quick work. So we've still got work going through from 2018. Which one was that? That was June. This is September 2018. And this is Tairāwhiti. So that's one of the dropouts that we've got up through there. As you can see, they're big retaining structures. That's also on Tairāwhiti, which gets 400 or 500 local truck movements a day going through there. At its peak, you've got one every 5-6 minutes going through. So you've got to try and manage the traffic going in at the same time. So these aren't quick fix things, even when we start. Then there's June 2020. Then we've got July 2020. And as you can see, some of these ones, this is out towards the west. You can see how big and deep. That's a 20-tonner at the bottom of that bench and fill that we're doing there. So this is big dig outs to build up some of those slumps once you see them sitting in there. And this is kind of the scary table when you start to look at it. So in the last 5 years, we've had $71 million worth of flood repair work go through. And that's only to June 2021. So you can see some really big hits are hitting across our network. Those are just the big flood repairs too. That's not everything that we've had to do because of weather. That's just flood repairs that we've had. We've given you a breakdown up there as well that not all of it had to be paid for by us. There was some that we got through PGF funding, which we've been delivering. But actually, when you look at it, you can see how big the flood hit has been for the last 5 years. And the fact that we're still talking about a flood event from 4 years ago shows that we're still trying to keep up across the network. So Cyclone Dovi at the moment, which was from March this year, we took another hammering on the network. At the moment, you'll see we're finalising our claims still with Waka-Kotahi, and that's what I was talking about with the mix of different parts where it's which flood event does it go to? Was it existing maintenance? Was that bridge abutment due anyway? All of those kind of things. So we're working that through with them, and I'll talk through some timeframes for that in a second. But at the moment, under our emergency funding, we would need another $2 to $3 million just for Cyclone Dovi to pay for the works that we've got there. We've also got events that are happening across the network, and we're in August, so we're in month 2 of this financial year. Just so you know, we've got $2.1 million for emergency works to get us from now until 30 June next year. So you can see it's already exhausted before we've hit the worst part of the year. And just to be clear, worst part of the year for us in roading is actually the cyclone season for us. So February through to end of April is when we get the worst whacks at the network. In winter, we don't get it as badly. The really expensive ones come in that shoulder season when we get those ex-tropical cyclones come down. So the process, and I've put this up and I want to walk you through it. So we've got to meet the process for Waka-Kotahi, which we're working through at the moment. And we have to get a whole lot of information to the board meeting, which is in the end of September. We will have an outcome at the end of at the first week of October is when we will know if we've been successful with our funding application. So they're aware of what we've got, they're aware of the damage. The application that's gone to Waka-Kotahi is whether or not they will do a bespoke FAR for us, so a funding assistance rate. So we are likely to get our normal emergency assistance rate, which is 87 cents at the moment. However, we've asked for a higher one than that, and Your Worship put through for 100% assistance rate for our funding assistance from Waka-Kotahi, and that goes to the board at the end of September. We're not waiting till then. So we've started the engineering designs for a number of sites across the network. So a lot of damage that we've got big dropouts and things. You saw those big dig outs on the likes of Tairāwhiti, etc. Those have to be engineered up, and that process does take time. And it's 8 to 10 weeks at the moment. And quite simply because we're competing. So WSP, Stantec, Becker are all doing vertical infrastructure, they're doing horizontal infrastructure, and this is bigger than anybody in Gisborne can deliver this. So the Gisborne teams are helping, but we need experts from outside of region to actually help with the volume of engineered sites that we have at the moment. To give you an idea, there's about 1,650 sites across the network that we've got as emergency works. We're trying to work through how many of those we can bundle, package up to be able to put out to tender. So we've started the engineering designs on the more simple ones so we can get these works started, subject to funding coming available in October. What we're also doing is as the designs are coming out, we're giving them to consenting, and we're trying not to give them one after the other. We're trying to bundle them for consenting as well so that they can help around how they do them. So if it's 5 retaining walls that are not near water, we're trying to do that as one consent rather than drip feeding them into consenting. At the same time, as we've got those designs, we're going to tender them subject to the funding becoming available. And that's starting process now. And I'll explain that more in a second around putting those tenders out. But we've got to be very careful around how we tender is to not wasting the contractor's time if we know there's no chance of getting the funding or the likely pool of funding, because it's expensive for them to tender. Then we talk about delivery starting hopefully from November. The reason I said hopefully is because we still have supply chain issues that we need to work through as well. So we're getting impacted even regionally on some of the issues that are happening. So with the state highways not being able to take heavies at the moment, that's slowed down rock delivery for us. So we get our rock, a lot of it comes from Uawa, so the big hard rock, but then we also get a lot from Ipotiki as well. We can't bring it around to 35, or we haven't been able to for the last few weeks. So we're starting to fall some of those things impacting just their supply chain issues, but then also it's going to start impacting our chip seal as well, because we'll start bringing chip seal into district soon. We can't bring truck and trailers through, then we won't be able to bring it through. So we're trying to work through all of those things, let alone talking about steel and concrete and all of those sort of things. Plus remember, our contracting pool is the same that is doing the state highway. They're also doing the housing boom that's happening at the moment. They're working on kanoas. There's a lot of work going on. They're the same contractors. If it's Fulton Hogan, remember they're also doing housing builds. They're doing subdivisions. They do a whole lot of other stuff. So we get priority in the queue, but there's also a lot of other people in the queue too that they need to do as well. And while that's happening, that was just a floodworks. This is not a floodworks site. This is the last time the blast dropped at Tinidoto there. So yes, we know that they keep dropping. As you can see, it's about a 45-degree angle with a whole lot of things that keep moving. It's like porridge, but when it comes down, those rocks, as you know, are bigger than cars and those things. At the same time, that's Anoda Bay Road. So that dropped late last week. As you can see, the road is somewhere in the middle there. So that's the road, then it drops here, and you can see that's where it should be, that's where it is now. That slip goes right up past the photo when they put the drone up over it. So huge problem there. And now we've got to try and figure out how we're going to do that. Didn't rain last week, so nowhere near flood level. So these are the sort of things that we're getting hit us at the same time that we're trying to do that. So we're well aware, Anoda Bay, we've got to engineer what some new route's going to look like. It's going to be very unlikely we can build where we are now. With everything I've just said, and as exciting as that was, we've also got some urgent work that we have to undertake, and Nadine's approved this work happening sooner rather than later. So what we're looking at is across the district, we know that the network's not looking great, and we know that it needs some work. So the team have gone through and we've prioritised priority 1, 2, or 3 for access roads across the district. The number one priority, quite rightly, is the school bus route. Is the school bus route safe? Is it passable? Can you still get through when it's raining? And that's our number one priority right now, is getting that to happen. And unfortunately, there are a number of parts across the district where it's not at the moment. So the teams have started on this as of Tuesday to get these sites taken up and get them sorted. The other one of the priority 2s, which we've started, which is safe access to connect our community. And this is as simple as, I'm sorry, Your Worship, going to use your car as an example again. This is where can the mayor drive there in her Mitsubishi Outlander with normal road tyres on it, and will she safely make it through when it's raining? And that's the new bar that we've got with Waka Kotahi as well. So that is around, can people safely get in and out of where they are at the moment? And there's a number where you cannot. The last one's the priority 3s. And you can see I've put an asterisk there. I'm conscious Councillor Warsnop sits closely in these meetings. This is about forestry and farm access. And we've been very upfront with forestry, and we're going to meet with the Wood Council about this, that they're not the number one priority at the moment because we have to get people safely to school and we have to get safely in and out of our community. However, we've got a heavy mettling program coming up, which we will work with them on, but we're going to prioritise it, because the need of them is huge across the entire network where they've carried on, and the roads aren't great now because they've punched the metal through. But actually, the big one for us is around farm access. So right now, this time of year, should be pretty obvious. It's winter, there's not much feed. So there's a huge animal welfare issue that we need to stay on top of and assist the farming around getting stock in and out, because you can't leave stock where there's no feed. And it's also around making sure that people can get their goods to market when they need to as well. So one of the things that we've agreed to work through with the farming community is, if they need access, making sure that we've got that lined up as well. And that's difficult. It's really difficult because things can go from okay to not okay pretty quick. But we're saying where we can, we'll try and make sure we can get access through. For engineered sites though, that's different, and we need to work with the trucking companies about how we get them in and out from that. But the trucking companies are the primary point of contact for that, around whether or not they're safe to go through. Can they take a truck through, or do they need to take a truck and trailer? So we're working through that at the moment as well. So we've got $3.1 million worth of work that has been prioritised, that has started now. And that's on 25 different roads across the district. And yes, I've deliberately put that very small up there because we're going to put a press release out on every single which of these roads are. And I'm trying to manage expectations on this as well. So we will give a list of this out today of where we're going to be and what we're going to be doing. But this is very much to make these roads safe. This is not heavy mettling. This is not us doing this. This is around fixing slumps, dropouts, culverts, so that it's safe for our community to get in and out at the moment. So it's about $3 million to do that. while we work on the funding claim that's coming through from Waka Kotahi, but then also while we look at our metling program that is about to start. And I'll talk about the seasons in a second. So that work's underway right now, and that's gone straight to the maintenance contractors through their contracts. So they will be undertaking those works so that we don't have to wait for tendering, and it's at our scheduled rates that we have with them that we've all just negotiated. So those urgent fixes, as I just said, how this will look is the stockpiles will get removed, drainage and culverts are a number of our big urgent fixes at the moment, and that's underway. However, as you see in the bottom, my left, Uawa-Hikuwai Road, that needs to happen now because they have to use the beach to get through there. Same with Wairiri Road, and no, that's not out at Wainui, that's out to the west. It's around how do we actually get access in for stock and for farms to be able to actually function at the moment. So we're getting those done. We've started the investigations as I've talked about, and I'll talk about disposal sites again in a second. But the thing we need to talk about is works are late this year. However, some are going to be 22, some will be 23, some may even go into 24, given the timeframes that we have to do for the engineering, the consenting, the tendering, because they're quite big jobs. Some of those really big retaining walls will run into a couple of $1 million. We need to make sure we get the right people in to do those at the right rates as well. So talk through that. Engineers, the engineer designs, we have started this. So we've got a supply panel for our engineering works for journeys. And this is a standing panel that we have of professional services suppliers. We've been through, they've been appointed because their rates have been negotiated, their expertise are all the ones we want. They have started to put that in now. So we've gone direct to them and we bring them all in at the same time. So Becca, Stantec, WSP, someone else I've forgotten that I'll probably get an angry phone call about, to talk about how we're going to do those designs, how do we prioritize them, how do we batch them up, and they do that collaboratively for them to get to the market as fast as we possibly can. Some of those ones you can see we won't be able to tender until July 23, and the reason for some of that is the really difficult ones we have to be careful in the design and how we're going to do them up, because when they go through consenting, we need to make sure that it's a consented program of works before we put it to tender, because if it doesn't get a resource consent or something needs to change, the costs change because the methodology changes too much. So as you can see, a couple of different tracks for what's going on at the moment. And I know there's frustration as to why we aren't doing things now. That's a pretty good example of why we're not doing stuff at the moment, because that was a brand new culvert that they were halfway through installing and it got taken out in the last event. So I just want to talk about how we do program delivery, and it's a cascading effect, and we have an annual work program. So I just want to say a huge thing to the incoming contractors, because they have an annual program, which is one of the first times that we've actually been able to have that pre-scheduled in for the year as to what they're going to be doing. And I'm going to show you some of it in a second. Then that breaks down. So we do the annual program, and that's around what budget has council got for that year. How can we deliver against it? What does it look like? That then gets broken up into monthly, and that depends on seasons. Then it gets into weekly, which is around where are we going to be each week, and we confirm that with our contractors as we go through. And then there's the daily operations, which is making sure we've got the resources, how are we ready for next week, are we doing the priorities, are we doing the checks, those things. So the annual work program, I can't explain how important it is to have that aligned to funding, because when we get to end of financial year, that's what you're going to call us up about, is how are we looking on budget. So it is around what work programs at a really high level, how can we do that within what we have available and where the asset needs to be. The other really big thing there is planning for resource balance, and that's super critical when you're trying to do an annual program. That's around what gear and equipment do we need, but also how much rock do we need to purchase, how much metal are we purchasing, what drainage materials do we need. That's super critical when it comes to our purchasing power, but then also around not having wastage across the network as well. So that everyone knows, and I'll show you the chart in a second, work activities can only be done at certain times of the year. We do not do heavy metalling. We try not to do heavy metalling at this time of year. If we put metal on right now, it'll get punched straight into the mud. It disappears within weeks, especially if it's got heavy vehicles rolling over it. Even if we put 100 mil big rock on, it gets punched through by a 50-ton truck. So you'll come back 6 weeks later and it's back to mud. So we try not to metal now. In saying that, we know the network needs metal, and we also know areas need grading. So we've just approved, we know it's coming. There's 1,800 tonne going on in the Waipawa district area because of how bad it is at the moment, to try and get the metal in, so we've got more material to grade. So in this time of year, we're getting our culverts done, our water tabling, and a little bit of grading and spot metaling, because we're getting ready for October, December. October, December is when we spend big money. So we spend big money in spring and in autumn. In summer, we try not to, and in winter, we really try not to. And I'll explain why in a second. So in spring, that's when we're doing our pre-seal repairs. So pre-seal repairs, when you see a pothole on the road that we have to rip up 10 meters worth or 100 meters worth, that is when we're going through and stabilizing what's under the ground. So you'll see them rip it up and then they leave it in gravel for a bit. There's a method to the madness there. That's called a pre-seal repair. So we rip that up, re-stabilize it, and we let traffic go over it for a bit, because actually that helps stabilize it down even further. That's getting ready for when we come through in March. January, March is when we go through and you'll see the sealing season start, and you hear us talk about sealing season. That's all pre-repairs. We're also getting our heavy metaling on because we've still got a bit of moisture in the ground and in the road, so we can actually blend it in quite nicely without punching it through, hopefully. But it also means we've got enough material there to grade as much as we can during spring. We try and avoid grading and vegetation clearance in summer because it's a fire risk. So we don't mow the lawns side of the road in summer, but particularly in January, February, because it's extreme risk of fire. And we've had a number of them, if you look back far enough in council records. So we try to minimize that sort of work during summer. We get our sealing done and we get ready to get the network ready to try and hold us through the end of financial year and to get everything ready for winter. So April to June, heavy metaling until we can't do it anymore. And that came around quick this year, I'll be honest with you. We still did everything. We spent 100% of our budgets, but it's been wet. So we do that. But for this time of year, we're literally coming out of winter. So the network isn't looking the best at this time of year. This is kind of our low point, but it is getting ready for us to start putting the work into the network. And this is what an annual spend looks like for us. So you can see those peaks and troughs that I just talked about, and it aligns with the seasons that I just talked about as well. So the one on the left is the Waipawa, which is predominantly unsealed, and the one on the right is the Tūranga, which is the city one. So you don't see as much of a peak, but what you will see there is you'll see a spike when it comes to the sealing season. So what that looks like, you've got in there, metaling comes in, unsealed road metaling is this dark blue one here. So that's in September 22, you're going to see a spike. That's us purchasing, that's us starting to put it down and roll it all in. Notice it's dropped completely away by December. We've stopped again. We leave it, we start popping back up again when we get through the other side. But even then, it's dropped right off again by the end of May. So we're trying to get rid of it before June again. That's where your big spike and your improvement comes on the unsealed network. Your sealed section happens, as I said, November, December through here, because that's when we're doing a lot of our work that we need to do that needs fine weather and it needs dry base course for us to be able to do that. Part of the things that we need to do with that, and I know this sounds a bit random, but it's actually clean fill. You know those big bluffs falling down at Tairāwhiti, for example? We've run out of sites. So literally we've filled in most of the gullies that we had around there. So yes, of course, we work with local farmers. You would have seen in the paper a few weeks ago, we put the call out for farmers who want gullies and things filled up. We're happily doing that and we're paying for it. So we've paid for the consents for those farmers we needed for us to fill those gullies up. It means we get to have a number of sites, and we've had a great response to that, but we still want more across the district. So we've still got 50,000 cube that we need to get off roadside dump sites, those things, to clear them all off. Part of that's around filling in areas where we need them. The blue dots are where we've got some issues. no kidding, the red one's Tini Roto. So it's around how do we actually get rid of some of that material? So that's a huge thing that we need to be able to help speed up, because those dump sites that are full of spoil at the moment need to be full of chip seal and metal when we get into those sides of seasons too. So it's that kind of need, one needs to move before the other. Sorry, I'm conscious of time. The last bit here is just around, we know the network needs work, but our big thing is we need to be able to get on and do our maintenance job at the moment. The huge thing for us is being able to do it. And one of the numbers I've put up there is 80-20, and it's around the expectation that we're trying to get with our maintenance contractors in the community that 80% of our time has to be spent on programmed maintenance for us to be able to do things within the budgets that we have at the moment. 20% can be reactive. The reason around that is the cost, and the cost is simple. For us to move a grader or a digger from one site to another costs thousands of dollars. It costs because we've got downtime, but it also costs because it costs a few $1,000s to pick a grader up or to drive it over or to put a 20-tonner on a low hauler and move it around the district. Actually costs literally thousands of dollars. We could spend $50,000 a month just in cartage fees to move machinery around if we're not clever. So what we're trying to do is minimize the reactive stuff. So what we want to do is to be able to package up work so we can get it out fast, but actually start front footing some of the things that I've just talked about. So as you can see, we've got an annual program, which is now going to go out on the website so that people can see where we're going to be. But it's also around making sure that with that annual program, it stays consistent so that if we say we're going to grade an area, we're going to grade an area. What that'll do is give the community a reassurance around when we're going to be there so that we're not reacting by sending a grader somewhere that was planning to go in a month or two anyway, and we're holding the road to get to there. So that's part of the increased comms that you will see come out under these new contracts, is where we're going to be and the expectation of when we will get to things. So for example, the potholes that are across the network at the moment, we know that they're there, but the permanent fix, we can't do them now. You know what it's like, there's nothing worse when you see our contractors go out, chuck some DGM or hot mix in a hole, and 2 days later, it's all popped back out again. The reason is because the hole's full of water, so that hot mix has got nothing to bind to, so it will always pop out. So it only looks good for a day or two. Yes, for some of them we have to, where people have broken axles or rims or those things, or we've got issues. By the way, people need to slow down. But part of that very much is around the best time for us to do big sealing section is coming up. And that's around that November, December. So it's letting the community know, we know those potholes are there. We're monitoring. If they get worse, then we'll actually rip them back out and turn them into gravel for a bit. Then we'll come back through and fix it in the sealing season. And that's what we're doing. Wainaki Road, for example, there are patches through there. We're not going to try and save. We're actually going to what we call revert them. We'll go through, rip it up, turn it into gravel that will hold until we're able to seal it in a few months' time. But at the moment, those potholes are too big. We can't hold them just with the heavy vehicles that are going over at the moment. So it's going to be reverted. It'll look ugly for a couple of months, but it's a whole lot cheaper than trying to keep on top of something at the moment that we just can't. Apologies for quite a long speech, but I just wanted you to see start to finish, there is a plan in place and we're hoping to communicate more as we go through.
Yeah, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I saw the press writing furiously, and I'm glad you're putting out some good comms on this, because as we all know, our community is forever sharing their concerns about this. And what you provided is a really comprehensive explanation of the realities, the challenges, but also our plans moving ahead. So I want to thank you and your team for that, Mahi. Can you, couple of questions. The annual plans, the 12-month annual programs, sorry, are they on track? And the part B of my question is that 80-20 you spoke about near the end, what percentage are our contractors currently running at? Are they running close to 80% or are they way off? And if so, why?
So through you, Chair, we're 100% on track when it comes to spends for roading. As you know, we were at our check to make sure before I said that with Pauline around our spends. So we have been hitting our spends, as you know. Spend is fine. The program, we're keeping within program already for these financial years. We've actually increased the outputs for August, has got a higher spend across the whole of the network around trying to get some work done. So for example, for some of the grading, for drainage, we're 10% of the year's budget's going into right now to try and ping some of these things up. Around the 80-20 at the moment, we are trying to get to that. So we have said, so we're 4 weeks into the new contracts too. Sorry, councillors, just for those who aren't aware, we're 4 weeks into the new contracts. It has been very much not reactive work. So we have not been doing anything. We let them do their program. I would say we were 80-20 for July. Prior to that, I would say it would honestly have been around 50-50 around reactive versus actually program maintenance. But there was a very, very clear direction to the incoming contractors. It can't go like that. We can't afford to just move things around. In saying that, stuff happens. We had to divert to Tiniroto. We're going to have to divert to Anoda. So that is stuff that just has to happen, but that's in that 20. We don't want that to be 50.
I have 3 questions of David. The first one, in terms of waka kotahi and the application for the funding, are you confident we're going to get it all?
Through you, Chair, we don't know what Waka Kotahi is going to be able to do this time around. They have been very upfront with us around their funding constraints that they're experiencing as well. They have significant issues around funding across the whole of the country. So we'll have to wait and see what the board has prioritised. The team have pulled together a really good application, but we'll just have to wait to see what the board's going to agree.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the 218, 219 emergency work, are we on top of it yet?
So through the chair, there's only very minor works that are left for us to do. So even when I say that it's $1 million worth of work, but it's finalising some stuff that needs to be done. It's not a large amount for us at all. It's literally, it's taken time for consenting. It's taken time for delivery of things to go through. So those roads are still passable. There are no issues. It's finishing off some of those things that are there. It's the finalisation.
And supplementary again, Mr. Chairman, in terms of funding we have in reserve, is there enough there to complete East Cape problem? East Cape Road?
So through you, Chair, for East Cape Road, we have got funding around the dropouts that will get us through to about the 18K mark. The bluffs, which are from the 18-kilometre mark, those final set of bluffs that get you around to the lighthouse there, we're going to have to look at those long-term options for there. They've held up the last few weeks, so we're quite pleased with that, with the work that's there, but we are still working on what a long-term fix looks like for East Cape Road, and that will be coming once we'll work that through with the community up there, what that looks like, but we don't have funding for a long-term fix for there.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman, do the community know what your plans are or what our plans are?
So
Especially that family at the end.
So through the chair, we'll be working with the Kohiris about whichever option we look to do. They were consulted when the original plans were done up a few years ago around option engineering, but this we very much want to meet with the Kohiri whānau and talk about what those aspirations for their whenua are, but then also recognising the lighthouse and its importance to the region as well.
Mr. Chairman, do we have a specialist culvert team out there addressing the issues of block culverts?
So through the chair, we have been focusing on culverts and drainage for the last month. We will again this month. So the teams are literally going out, finding and repairing culverts. A lot of the interim works that we can do now has been drainage and culverts, and that's what they're prioritising.
Thank you.
Sandra.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Wilson. Excellent presentation. Some of the rural community are looking forward to supporting your application to Waka Kotahi also. I have 2 questions. We'll start with the easy one. The consenting process, is it possible at all to expedite it? Is it as streamlined as it can be?
Through the chair, we've been working with the regional arm around the types of consents that we will need and the types that we won't. So they've already gone through and triaged the sites where they know that we've kind of talked about. So we've had what we call a pre-lodgement meeting with them around the types of work that we look to bundle. So we're trying to make the consent process as simple as possible, and also looking at our global consents that we have to try and do works under those where possible too. A lot of these sites are quite tricky. They do need to have an environment, a very good consent and a very good environmental management plan around them. There's a lot of this is going to be happening in rivers, streams, trying to get around inanga spawning season. Those sort of things are all factors that we have to take into account.
Thank you. Second question. Primary industries generally are a seasonal business. The exception now, unfortunately, is forestry. And I'm very conscious and want to be very clear that this is not an anti-forestry commentary, given that there are a lot of people employed throughout winter within the forestry industry and contracting teams, families included. With that in mind, is it at all possible, given that we're already approving truck movements across some of our network for livestock, is it possible at all to work with the forestry industry to draw the harvesting across that outside of the October to June window when the network is as stable as it's going to be, through that very wet area time through the winter? Is it possible to draw harvesting out of those areas and onto less vulnerable parts of the network?
Through you, Chair, we've had initial conversations with the Wood Council, and we need to go back, given the stage that the network is in at the moment, around where we're going to prioritise funding and where we're not. And we're very upfront about the fact that we won't be able to do all of the sites that they want us to do at the moment. The best example I can give at the moment would be Waipiro Bay. So we've got both issues with both access roads at the moment, and a forestry company wanting to haul out of there. We've agreed we'll open one side, but we won't open both. And it's around trying to get the timings right for them as to make sure that we can get some things out. We know they need it done yesterday. However, it's around our priorities, the community, and getting that done. When it comes to some of the other forestry roads, we've been upfront around the fact we won't be able to hold them for some of the seasons coming up, just given what's there. One thing I will say is the forestry industry have been great around saying, well, if you can't, how can we work with you? What material, what plant, what people can we help to get those roads to where we need to? And we need to go back to the Wood Council and their members around how we're going to do that again for this season coming up. It's not going to get any better.
I guess the question is more around your annual work plan across the wet season and getting trucks off those vulnerable areas, and given enough scope or enough advance warning whether or not the industry can work with you to stay out of some of those areas.
Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, David. I guess for all of us in this space, we're always cognizant of the magnitude of roading and the infrastructure it is in our region. It was good that you were able to really give an overview, just reminding people of the magnitude of this work. And so I'm grateful for the comms, because I almost feel like we have to do this comms weekly to just remind people that we really are aware of our roading network and potholes and all the frameworks that people come at us to do RFSs on, et cetera, et cetera. And I was kind of heartened that you used some musical frameworks with heavy metal and soft rock and how difficult those two are to kind of work together. So we are always told our geology in this region is rubbish. Respect to roading, so science in respect to not doing the same thing and getting the same results. So I guess my question is, in the maintenance programs, etc., are we able to do more resilience to this network that is physically challenged simply because of what it's made of? Has that been a significant factor moving forward, so that we've got long-term, I guess, sustainabilities and all the factors we talk of? Because I feel like we're just constantly playing catch up to a maintenance program that's been wanting for many years because of funds. So are we doing new science with regard to the geology you have to work with?
Through you, Chair, the underlying geology we're not able to fix in a number of these areas. It's the hillside is falling, not the road, the whole hill. The Noda Bay example that I gave is a perfect example of the issue that we have there. Where we can, we stabilise and we try and put in the most resilient fixes we can afford, but the underlying geology and climate change are the biggest issues that we have.
Supplementary with those slip slides spaces, we're working in with planting to keep the hills there. Is that part of another part of this work?
So through you, Chair, the TRMP will be looking at things like land use going forward and that sort of stuff. For us in journeys, it's more around how do we keep the network, it's around the operation of what we're doing going forward, but I'm sure the TRMP will look at those sort of things.
Thank you.
Okay, Pat.
Two, three priorities, and where it's pastoral farming and forestry, there are still families that live on those roads and families that children need to get to school. And that's absolutely critical to our region, and those roads into Waipiro Station, Waipiro Bay, which are under threat at the minute. And we've just heard Mr. Wilson say we're going to fix one access. Children need to get to school from Waipiro Bay too. So a lot of our communities are really doing it tough. So we appreciate the work that's gone in. And just one comment I'd make about the paper on page 18. Once the decision is known, it's the second bullet point, the options will need to be presented to the incoming council. I'd urge us to listen to the recommendations of the council officers that are doing all the work, and I wouldn't want to see the decisions relitigated. You know, council will have done the work, council officers will have done the work, done the planning, understand what needs to be fixed first. And I just hope that going forward, we can accept the recommendations that the council officers make. I just have one question. You didn't mention inline, Mr. Wilson, and you did mention drainage and culverts, and they have vegetation clearance contract. And I know vegetation is secondary, but there's lots of places on our roads where it's fallen down and it's just there, and it's not stopping us getting by, but there is work that could be done, and and I trust that it is being done somewhere. It's not going to cause a fire at this time of year, and I think there's quite a lot of places. Well, there's places across the whole network, isn't there? Which are, well, they might be just 2 lanes, but it's 1 lane now because there's something hanging over the road. We all know it because we see it every day. So are they active out there in their new contract, please?
Through you, Chair. Remiss of me not to mention inline. The team have stepped up really well and have done fantastic emergency response across the network. A number of issues we have of fallen trees or debris on the network are actually part of the emergency works claim as well. So that's why some of them, the measure, just so everyone's clear, is actually the mayor's car. So if Red can get through, if it's single lane in her car, we're not able to touch things. So even if it's across 1 lane of 2, as long as one's open, that's enough, and we can't spend money. We can only spend money to open the road for people to get through safely. So if there is a tree across the road, if there's a slip across the road, but 1 lane's still open and we've got it marked up, then it's open. So a lot of the work that inline's got, so they have got a backlog inline, which they inherited, which they're working through, but we've prioritized it. The second part is some of that is emergency works funded, which we're waiting for approval from Uawa-Hikuwai to start.
Can I supplement you to that? I absolutely get that. And with farmers get out and clear the trees and they don't complain, they just do it because the road needs to be open. I'm not really talking about big trees. I was just wanting to have confidence that, and you said in that stepped up, that they are working progressively across the district, doing smaller rubbish, but it's rubbish that is, which is not blocking us, but it's an absolute direct result of the lack of maintenance that was done on roads and culverts for all the site. Whereas a few years ago, we did have a blitz in odd roads and the vegetation clearance would happen. So are they working as well as emergency work? They've got a program across the region?
So through you, Chair, we've got a program for inline across the network based on budget, which we can afford to clear. There is a backlog of trees across the network that we would like to do, but it's in multiple millions of dollars. So we're working through our annual prioritised program. They would be 90% program, 10% reactive, just because of the nature of what they're doing. So they are undertaking assessments constantly around, is it safe, has it moved, can vehicles get through? So they have got a prioritised program which we review with them monthly as well.
Thank you. It is a challenge, but
Okay, Terry.
Thank you for the report. I notice this is predominantly just namely outside the city. What about work within the city? Is there you know, a lot of work to be done within the city? Is it being costed up?
So through you, Chair, a lot of the damage in the city is just potholes and maintenance that we will have, that we will be doing as part of the sealing season when that comes through. A lot of the drainage has been taken care of by Fulton Hogan under their contract. So we don't have as many issues across the urban area. The potholes that we do have, as I said, will be done in September. The subsidence sites that we have within the district are waiting, in the urban area are waiting for consents or engineering assessments.
So that's like Hill Road. Yeah, thank you.
Terry.
Thank you. Appreciate the very fulsome report. I especially appreciate that you went all the way back to the beginning, because to be very clear, our public in their submissions to the long-term plan raised the issue of roads more than they raised anything else. And we did not fund the LTP to maintain roads in their current state. So no one should be surprised that they're no longer in the state that they were 3 years ago. That's something that the next council need to be very mindful of. Roads are not something that just sit there happily and stay in their current state. If you don't fund them, they become the bow wave that Dave has mentioned, and the problem's just getting more and more enormous. Obviously not aided by the fact that we've had probably the wettest winter that I can ever recall. But I think now that we're landed with this, what can't really be described as anything other than an enormous mess beyond the city. I know the city's actually looking pretty rough as well. The task really is how do we address it? I think I'm really supportive of the priorities, and I think the community will be as well. I've had a few phone calls, and no doubt the team will have as well, around school bus routes and school buses being stuck. A school bus being stuck is never a good outcome, and surely that by all means should be our first priority. I also want to acknowledge the fact that there are quite a number of businesses under a lot of pressure right now from the inability for heavy traffic to move. They're staying reasonably stoic about that at the moment, but it will be hurting them. And a lot of that is yet to probably flow through our regional economy. My question, I suppose, I've got a few questions. That the primary one is our 100% funding. It's been noted that we have to demonstrate that we actually can't afford it, rather than we don't have the political will to afford it. And I guess my question is, what risk is there that is the conclusion that they draw, that in fact we could prioritise other spending and we didn't? What happens to our unfunded, I guess, emergency budget if we are left with 87% funding? What is the size of that bill to ratepayers? That's my first question.
So through the chair, the application that's been made to the Uawa-Hikuwai board was very explicit in the community's inability to pay. And the finance team went right back to the long-term plan around the discussions of affordability for our community, around our demographics. All of those things have fed into that application to explain a lot of the stuff that I briefly touched on at the start around largest area, low ratepayer rating base, unaffordability. All of those things have been very well articulated in the application that has gone through. If we don't get the funding, there's a exercise where we would go through, look at our available funding that we have, and then start to reprioritise over multiple years, and that would have to come from within existing budgets. And that would not be a pretty exercise at all, but we'd have to sit down and look at what that looks like. If we were funded at the 88%, we'll have to find that of the 20 odd million dollars that we have across us. So we'd have to try and take that from existing budgets. The difficulty with that is that's taking the GDC share, which remember is a lot more impact than if we take it from a dollar that we have, because actually for us to have a GDC dollar, we have to find 66% more because we don't have it, because it's hidden for a Uawa-Hikuwai. So I haven't even run that scenario because it would take us a very long time and it would be very depressing.
I understand that it would be depressing, but I also know Uawa-Hikuwai will be looking very wearily at setting a precedent with us. Don't worry, I think they should set a precedent by all means. We desperately need this funding. There's no question about it. Our region is grinding to a halt as we speak. But we do need to know the cost of them refusing us what we're asking. Because I think that not necessarily this table, but you're going to go into a new LTP year next year. Your new council are going to start this process all over again, and they probably need to start being mindful of what happens if you get put back in this position, because we're not going to get 100% again, even if we get it this time. So I think that is information that is going to be needed.
Pauline, you know the number?
Yeah.
For the chair, yeah. So as part of the submission that was given to Uawa-Hikuwai, it was just consider what what have we been facing, what are we doing, and what are we trying to move forward? And mindful at each part of the process was the affordability and the ability to do that. And it gave the history, starting back with what we considered back in 2015, that 2% rates increases. But what did that do when we did have that? And we knew that in 2017, we had a $6 million loan that was required on the roading network, and we're still paying that back, and we're still paying that back up until about 2030. And all of the things that we've considered is about how can we do this affordably, and what is the increment. So your question, what is the cost associated with the 40-odd million that is at just now? In terms of it, if they only gave the 67%, is a 25% increase in rates. If they reduced to an 87%, then the increase is still considerable. It's still 10%. And having that in mind, we also gave them the background that we are at our highest rates increases for the last 10, 12 years. That is, we also know that inflation, when we allowed for in the bill, was around 2 or 3%, but is actually triple that. And we also are increasing pressure from interest rates that are going up more than what we have. So we're saying that each part of that we had, in order to even get our 6.5%, we used our reserves. We used everything that we possibly could to be able to be in a position to make it affordable to our region. So it was quite strong, and it was quite clear that that's how we applied for it. But if we did not, we also said this is the implications that we actually have, and we're facing on the immediate one to actually deal with the 40-odd million that we've got out there.
Thank you very much for that answer. I think that that's yeah, really, really good case, and in particular some stark implications clearly. Thank you, Pauline. My last part of my question was the 80-20 ratio, presuming that we are using 20% of our time resources in reactive work. Does that mean that that is 20% of maintenance that is not occurring, because obviously that doesn't work over the long term?
Through you, Chair, the 20% is still maintenance work. It's repairing things, it's fixing things that would have been in the maintenance program, but they've had to jump up in a priority for some reason as to why they have to happen now. So for example, maybe we've got a culvert that's blocked, unimaginable, that needs to happen now rather than when it was programmed, which might have been in 12 months time, that for a scouring reason or a damage reason has to happen now. So it gets programmed forward. That would be something that would be within that 20. So it's where we've moved stuff up. It's maintenance work that's just happening faster.
Okay, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you for that thorough report. At the beginning, you said we need 161.7 million to get the network back. We're applying for 26.7 million. So, which is for the emergency works. Going forwards, how on earth are we going to get some of these roads open?
So pleased you asked me that. So in the long-term plan, when we did our asset condition assessment, we were 161 million short of what we could afford as a community. That's in relation to there's not enough metal on roads. We've got chip seal that's past its use by date that we know is going to fall apart. We've got AC renewals that we know need to do as well. So that's across the whole network. That was the quantum that we needed. What we flagged in the RLTP is that the next one we're going to have that bow wave. So we're going to need to figure out how we're going to either find funding for that, or we're going to have to start making some hard calls on the condition of the network and reverting things further than what they are now in order to be able to get it within our community's ability to pay. So it's one of the things that we're going to need to look at going forward as to what do we do around the shortfalls, what things can be pushed out, what things can't be pushed out that actually need to happen now, and we need the budgets in order to get those things back up again. But that's going to be a hard conversation for this table next year around how do we prioritise the spend across that LTP.
I've just got one question too before Isaac. We're talking predominantly rural roads. What is the priority for our state highways? Because I know there's a number of people have been struggling even to get through to the Bay of Plenty at the moment through potholes, blowouts, and even down south. The state highways are in a terrible state of repair. So what priorities does Waka Kotahi put on that, and how much influence do we have in prioritising the work on our state highways to access the regions?
Through the chair, sorry, we'd have to refer that to the Regional Land Transport Committee for them to answer as themselves as Waka Kotahi. We don't have any control over the work program for Waka Kotahi for the state highways. That's thankfully one that we don't have to deal with now, but it'd be something for them. And I know that the chair of, Pat, that you've been talking with Waka Kotahi around the next presentation that's coming to the Regional Land Transport Committee. We have been offering to around resources where they need them, or if they've needed anything, we have made the offer around contractors, staff, or dump sites consenting. We have been where we can, but it very much sits with Waka Kotahi.
Thank you. Didn't mean to add salt to the wound. Isaac.
Yeah, might as well have a request. Can we get that 30 minutes of presentation packaged up and put out to the community? Because it was probably the most succinct and comprehensive analysis I've ever seen. And I've been at the same for 2 years. And I think it's really important for incoming councillors to understand that we were sitting, because we're quite limited in options. We either got to pay more, petition central government to pay more, deal with what we've got, or find some urgent other transport options. And I think it's important for incoming councillors to understand that before making promises, and the community to understand that, you know, realizing, yeah, they are affected by this, but as a region, we just can't afford it going forward. So can we package that 30 minutes up and have it as available to the public?
It is. It was shared screen. It's available to the public via YouTube.
Oh yes, but outside of the meeting as well, because a lot of people won't go into a meeting and look at it.
Through the chair, there's a comms program that will come out with this. This is the start of that conversation with you first, and then actually be talking about with our community about what it looks like, and someone far more articulate than I will do that. It'll look much better.
It's more than just live screened at a meeting, and it's more than the comms program we have. The community are asking for someone to come to their community meetings to talk to them about it, and even if that PowerPoint was put up and moved along more quickly, it would be really helpful, because the public and our rural people are generally pretty accepting that it's tough, but to understand the process and when and the timeframes, and when they can see some of these fixes is actually what they've been asking. So I would really like to think that we are going to be more available to our community than we have been for the last little while. And I know the work has been done to get this process up and running. Something else came out of those conversations that I wanted to respond to Councillor Foster. I mean, those of us who travel on the highway see the work Waka Kotahi is doing, but we know there's a whole lot more work. And I mean, they've been, I was going to say planned. Contractors have been working on that slip, which is just a minor dropout, like several that Mr. Wilson showed on the slide, just this side of Matawai, and it doesn't seem to change if you go by fortnightly. But I'm sure that there's a lot of work goes into, you know, restoring those kind of substantial slip outs, and we have others on our own network. And I mean, the amount of money that must have been spent on the Makarori Hill, and while they stopped needing to take spoil of it in the last week, they've started working at the top of that again. So I mean, that must be costing a huge amount of money, but we do need to keep on them. So I suggest you come to the next RTC meeting when I'm sure their work will be scrutinised, and they'll be able to give us some responses.
I was actually just referring to potholes, small maintenance, but anyway, that's another. I will do that. I'll come. Is there any more? Oh, we have Your Worship.
Talking about community meetings, Councillor Worsnop and myself had the privilege on Friday night to attend a non-related, a fun event at Matawai. And once the community heard that I was coming their way, they asked if I would be able to not bring my mayoral vehicle, but come through the back roads. And
the community was really open-minded when we did chat to them. So we saw firsthand wharekopai, te wera, and work that needs to be done there. And I know our teams have already responded with when work will happen there. But one thing I think we should also add to today's discussion is thanking our community for being patient as well. I know these are unprecedented times. We are dealing with a perfect storm. In my time in Gisborne, and I've lived here 21 years, I have never seen these types of rain events, and also the huge amount of money and the huge amount of work going into our roads. I travel up the coast at least twice a month. Both times I got stuck in the Koporua Hill behind trucks, and we had to use number 8 wire ingenuity. There's no coverage, so we just need to travel, someone go and ring for some help. So I also do want to say to our communities today, thank you so much for being patient. We are doing our best. We are working hard. Thank you for being kind to our teams up and down the coast to the west. If you are frustrated, please feel free to reach out to me, but be kind to our workers on the road. And then I also want to say we are actively working alongside Waka Kotahi. I just sent to councillors last night, and I'm sending it to the editor today as well, the information that Waka Kotahi is sharing with communities, trying to keep them updated on what work is happening. Sometimes when we see work happening, we think, why on earth are they doing that? But there is a reason why stuff sometimes happens, sometimes of the year, where a pothole is just quickly filled. It's a temporary fix just for a short term until something proper can be done. So I do also want to say I had the opportunity to have two hui with the CEO of Waka Kotahi in Palmerston North. And in a Tairāwhiti frame, we are talking about weather impacts and financing and what we prioritise. They are having that discussion nationwide, where they have to also deal with these events that happen across our country, and also funding constraints. So she reassured me, and I did lobby for us, because I know our papers are going in front of them in September. But she knows our place, she's been here, she's from here, and but also she made it clear to me we need to take into account the discussions they have with us and the issues they have here, even though I think our issues are more severe because of our geology, like Councillor Akuata Brown said earlier. It is for us, some of our lifelines are cut off. So I just wanted to also make sure our community know we are really, and Councillor Seymour is our link through our Regional Transport Committee with Waka Kotahi, where we are trying, not just as a region, but also as a total East Coast community, trying to work constructively to get the best for our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think
And I'll move the paper.
okay, I'll discuss. Can I have a second, thanks? Okay, moved by Your Worship and seconded by Councillor Seymour. All those in favour? Right. We're actually behind schedule, but we'll have smoko and then we'll be back in 10 minutes, 20 past. Thank you.
Apologies, I have to go, Mr. Chair. I need to catch the flight to get back to Gizzy.
Okay, right, we'll move to page 21, Ministry of Environment, Freshwater Farm Environment Plan Pilot with Gisborne District Council, page 21. And yeah, just prior to that, I'd like to just thank David for a really comprehensive report before. That was really interesting, and just a bit of an insight of where we're at and the huge problem that we're faced. Hopefully we don't have any more rain events before the end of the year. Okay, page 21.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Could we ask Mr. Hudson to speak to us and with respect to this and how it might fit in with other farm environment plans that council and government are directing the landowning community to participate in.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kerry. I'll see.
Grab a seat here.
Mr. Chairman, you just speak quickly with this. It's very new, and we are actually having a catch-up meeting with MFE today, and they've been very inclusive with Environment Southland and Waikato Regional Council. So they're the three entities we're going through this with. It's a golden opportunity for us to outline the uniqueness we have in our district. Initially, the Farm Environment Plan rolls out as being nutrients, sediment, bacteria in that order. Nutrients is not our issue, ours is sediment. So we need to make the most of that. Some of the things we are really looking at through this process is our rural landowners have got a whole range of things coming out at the moment, and can we tie a lot of this into a single approach of how we deal with that? That's gone down really nicely to date. We also had Ministry for the Environment have a staff member come and interview several landowners throughout the coast, and we assisted with that with a range of landowners. And some of the things that came out of that was exactly that, how much they've got coming at them at the moment, and can't we tie this all in together? And that's where we'd like to go, and that's where council would like to go as well on that. So they were the main things, but it is a golden opportunity for us, and we do have some further preliminary meetings with Ministry of the Environment. We've actually been proactive in sending them an outline of where we'd like to go. So we're trying to set the direction, and to date that appears to have been quite helpful.
So thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to move the paper and I draw people's attention to 10 on page 22. And just as Mr. Hudson said, it will build on existing farm plans, and the pilot will clarify how we transition our existing Tairāwhiti freshwater plans and sustainable hill country plans into potentially one plan. And as we might have mentioned, I certainly mentioned it yesterday, we already have substantial plans around land property in the district, and we have overlay 3A and requirements around that. And so we need to be really clear that we do want to capture information, but we don't want to create unnecessary work. And so if it can be drawn together into one plan instead of every various departments deciding that they'll have another kind of plan, it is just hugely onerous and won't get done. Whereas if it's practical and reasonable, builds on the data we hold already, and does as item 10 suggests, I think that will be quite acceptable to our community. So thanks for your attention to it. I'm happy to move the paper.
Thank you, Pat. Sandra.
Thank you, Kerry. I think you know what I think about more plans on farm. I'm just sitting here jotting down farm environment plans, animal health plans, global food audits, animal welfare plans, health and safety plans, etc., 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 etc. What I'm interested in is what data is being captured and where it's being stored and what it's being used for, because generally speaking, and as Councillor Seymour has outlined, farming businesses, horticulture businesses are planned within an inch of their life already. What gets done with this data in the interests of the grower, the producer who's making the plans? Where is the benefit for our landowners in this?
So with this legislation coming along, I think we need to be really proactive in how we can assist it. And the point you make is, if that information has been gathered, what has it been used for, and is it helpful? So we'd like to think the information we hold, and I don't know that that's well known throughout the country. We hold a lot of information on our land, and it is really valuable. And the point Councillor Seymour made about land overlay 3A, we've already been down this process. Not many other regions have. So we have quite an advantage there, and the relationships we've built there have been pretty sound, and we could see this as a continuation of that, which is a huge advantage in terms of we're not doing a lot of duplication. So there's a lot of information coming in a wider planning process that I think we need to get alongside MFE here and say, well, look, we want sort of one approach. Can we tie it all together? So that's part of where we want to go in this pilot as well. People are producing all this, we do it once and we do it very well.
And to what use is the information?
Well, at the end of the day, with this process we're in here is to see if we're getting some improvement in water quality. And so the steps we take with regard to farming properties is that, are we building some sustainable gains from that information? Are we measuring it over time? So we don't want to put people to expense where we're not getting some foreseeable gains. For instance, right now, we've been through the situation. A lot of people have done a lot of fencing that has been really knocked around in these last few events. We don't want to be in a situation where we are enforcing that, where it is just a huge expense and what gains are we getting? We want to work alongside people and get down that trail. So if information has been gathered, it's got to be useful, and people are a lot more accepting of that. The 4 people we went and saw with MFE earlier on, if they can see what the outcomes of this effort is, they seem to be more than happy to be part of it.
Thank you.
Kerry.
Thank you. Thanks, Kerry, for the work you're doing in this space. I'm really supportive of us being part of the trial, and specifically why I'm supportive is if you look at the test farms on page 32, the closest one to us is a vineyard in Hawke's Bay. So there are, of all the 40, not one of them bears much of a resemblance to hill country farming in this region. So very potentially, and we saw this with the original freshwater reforms, was that whoever was kind of close to the people framing the shape of those reforms, their influence kind of came out really strongly. And so you had a whole suite of plans that were really, really well suited to Southland. and it didn't bear any resemblance really to how we would be able to implement those plans up here. So I do think that it's probably going to play a fairly key role in highlighting the fact that our land and the way that we farm is really, really different to a fairly large amount of New Zealand. And so I think that will probably be helpful for us in the long run. Like Sandra, I do share some concerns with regards to ultimately how the information is held, especially an integrated plan ultimately ends up essentially being a business plan, which means that if you are able to, access that via the Goima process, you can essentially find out absolutely everything about that farm business. And that is, there's no other businesses where you can find out everything about the business by asking council. So I think there's some equity issues there. So if it's possible for us to reinforce that point with the people who are pulling this plan together, I would appreciate that. I note that we're using resources that are already within our teams. I would be surprised if you have much spare resources. So I'm pleased to see that MFE is funding to some extent the work that's happening here, but do we know, is that likely to cover the time that is required from council? Do we actually understand the extent to which this will absorb resources, and can we afford them?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the interesting things there are, yes, part of the pilot to us is, and it's certainly evident with where Southland's at the moment, is we can't resource this. So there needs to be a realisation that if a council is going to be tasked with doing this, we need to be able to resource it. So that probably needs to be some external. We are actually looking at getting some external funding through the Hill Country Erosion Fund at the moment. That's a different government department. The equity thing is really critical, and there's some confidentiality things in here that we need to be able to maintain. And one of the things we are pushing with MFE, and talking with Southland about it yesterday, was we need to look at this from a catchment approach. And so if you're one property within a catchment of 20 other farms, some of those confidentiality things are bound together. And we're looking at the good of the whole catchment. So that hasn't really come to the fore too much, and it's one of the items we're going to bring to the fore with MFE. The other point you raise about the farms they looked at were well divorced from our region. So we're getting an opportunity here to nominate a number of properties within our own district. When MFE first came to me, could we talk with a cross-section of people on different farms? We'll need several of your dairy farms and several others. And I said, well, we've got 4 in total dairy farms. So we didn't go there at all in the end. And so we've looked at what suits our region. And I think the understanding that MFE are getting out of that is pretty significant.
Oh, microphone, please.
Page 60. Strengths, opportunities and issues for current biodiversity management in Tairāwhiti.
That's in the next paper, actually.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we'll get that.
Oh,
We'll come to that next.
I've jumped ahead, sorry.
Okay, do I have a mover in this paper? I'll move it by Pat, seconded by. Oh, sorry, Tony. Yeah, one more, sorry.
So paragraph 8 talks about the size of the properties that will require an FWFP. And it talks about 5 hectares for horticulture. Now, the degradation of the Tairāwhiti is a major issue, not for necessary sedimentation, but for contamination and nutrients. Have you got any idea of the number of properties that feed water courses that feed into Tairāwhiti, which are going to be captured by that? And is 5 hectares a cumulative figure? I mean, a farmer could have a 4.5 hectare block on this side of the road, another 4.5 hectare block in 2 different titles. How do we treat 5 hectares? Because the Tairāwhiti, as we know, is a water course under significant pressure, and it's principally coming off the flats. Are we going to be able to, under this, capture and redress the situation there?
We still need some clarification on the 5 hectare thing. So it's 5 and 20, and they're very well. Thought they were very clear on that. There's still some work to do on that, and part of this process would be the uniqueness we have with some of our flat land, as you've raised there. So yeah, we still need to go through that, but that's another reason why it's quite good to be part of this process. The other thing we have with land area is we've got some very large properties with a wide range of land and lands in various forms of soil erosion and stability. And that is quite a big task to deal with. And what we've already talked with MFE about is some land still needs some quite significant land use change. Perhaps some still needs to be in forest. And we are not really through the farm plan process looking too closely at what may end up in forestry. So we believe that that should be incorporated into this as well as part of the scope we're trying to work through with MFE. But the land areas are still a bit of an issue, and you raise a good point.
Sorry, Kerry, I don't think you really answered my question. My concern is principally around the properties that are feeding the water courses that are feeding the Tairāwhiti. There's a lot of nutrients and bacterial contamination of that waterway. Those properties are principally on the flats. Are they going to be able to fly under the 5 hectare radar? Is the definition of a property the cumulative property of a single entity, or is it, just a title block, or is it a business block? So for example,
well, they've just given us the figure of 5 hectares at the moment. So it's one of the things that we are grappling with. We need to clarify it, and if it means we have issues coming off areas smaller than 5 hectares, we need to bring that to the fore. But I understand what you're saying. So you may have someone who's got 3 titles and it goes beyond 5 hectares. We might have someone out there with 1.5 and he's got another 5 somewhere else. So we need to be able to match the problems we're getting out there with the land areas.
And kind of a right reply and to respond to some of what Councillor Robinson raised too, and in support of what Mr. Hudson's saying. I mean, this is the heading is freshwater farm plans, and if we recall yesterday we had discussion in the workshop towards our TRNP, and so those matters of clean water are going to come up in the tributaries within the city, I'm sure, in the work that is in the freshwater plan or our total Gisborne district plan. And to those who wondered what's going to be done about it, regrettably, I imagine, and that's on page 28, it is all going to be moved towards, over time, regulation, which council will be required to monitor. So we ought not to be naive enough to think they're just doing this to be nice and cheerful. So eventually it will be something that potentially council will be required to monitor. And it's just occurred to me that it doesn't actually address forestry in here. And we only have to think about nameless sites on the East Coast where there were trees and then there weren't, and what happens to the degradation, because it really does. I mean, I'm really pleased with a pilot and I have absolute confidence that Mr. Hudson will follow this up. But on 28, it says what the aims are, and that's what we should notice. Stop further degradation, show material improvement within 5 years, and reverse past damage within a generation. So I would suggest that is quite a challenge, and particularly where land may come out of forestry and go into pastoral farming. And is this going to cause someone to have to go around and take a monitoring check of what is the status of our whole district now? Because how can you say there's going to be a material improvement within 5 years if you haven't got a starting point? So this is indicative of a huge amount of work and cost. So good that we're a pilot, because a lot of these questions can be asked. So I'm happy to move the paper, as I said, and just look forward to hearing, some of these wrinkles being ironed out, as in small properties, not necessarily a farm, larger areas, once upon a forest and then not a forest anymore.
Yeah, so this was one of the key points with our submission process was we have some issues with forestry in this district. Why are they exempt for it? So we pushed pretty hard for that. One of the encouraging things about that is recent updates with forest industry is they are wanting to be part of this, whether they are required to have a farm environment plan or not. The NES is a reactive piece of legislation where it only comes alive when there's some activity occurring. We want some long-term planning on all land uses. So it's a point we made at the submission stage, and it's a point we'll make again with MFE now, as this pilot goes through. So they're the advantages we get. We've also got a really good land classification system in our region, and we're seeing that as really valuable going forward. And that came to the fore in those 4 initial interviews we had with landowners with MFE.
Okay, thank you. Okay, got a mover by Councillor Seymour, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All those in favour? Aye. Kerry. I'd just like to thank Kerry and the impressive work that you do in our region, Kerry, for our regional landscape. You are renowned for your knowledge, and I think your reputation is just very impressive. So thank you so much for the work that you do for the region. It's so appreciated by everybody.
Thanks for that. And yeah, we really want to make this thing work. So we'll be reporting back to core and operations pretty regularly about it. It's going to be pretty intense, but it's actually a pretty exciting thing to be involved in. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Page 46. Gisborne District Council's internal biodiversity work plan. Oh, and before we carry on with this, I've had a request to swap the Uawa-Hikuwai Catchment scientific bore drilling project in place of Peel Street toilets update. We'll swap those two around. If there's no objections, we'll do that. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Don.
Through you, Chair. So I'm just going to bring 4 points about this plan that's laid out in the agenda. So it's really as it says, it's an internal biodiversity work plan. So it's giving a bit of direction, and it initially talks about the context of the national and regional processes relating to biodiversity. So it's been a good chance to collate those and see where everything sort of connects up. So the sort of trigger for creating this plan was LTP process allocated 100K, and this plan is really to ensure that that spending is well prioritised. The third point is really around the actions in the work plan. They provide sort of good foundation for work in the future development of the regional biodiversity strategy, which is later on in out years of the LTP. And probably the final really important thing is sort of the development of this plan sort of highlighted the importance of needing to start discussions with tangata whenua and other stakeholders in this space about biodiversity aspirations before embarking on that regional biodiversity strategy, which really locks things in. This is a good sort of scoping opportunity, I think, to do the groundwork, some of the groundwork, and well before the hopefully deadlines roll around. So,
great. Okay, we got any questions for Don? Meredith? Okay. Meredith first.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Listen, thanks, Don, for your report in regards to this, because you're right, it is in the spotlight, the space. One of the spotlights has been on these beautiful little penguins. And I'm just wondering, when we talk about species under, the space, have we got enough resources of people, I suppose, to monitor, that space? Because I know that's been in the headlines because of, unfortunately, the habitat where it is, etc. So I see species in the mix here, but particular species that are under threat, etc. Have we got enough, I guess, people resource or people who are working in that space? Because it seems to start-stop, as far as intervention stuff. And the long-term sense of biodiversity.
through you, Chair. Yeah, it's quite a challenging one when you've got species work, because that crosses over with the Department of Conservation. So there's sort of that need to collaborate on how to manage things. So probably to answer your question, no, there's not capacity really to, because you've got a whole raft of biodiversity that needs attention and to be managed. So it's sort of how to, comes back to that prioritisation and how can you, I guess, work with reactive situations, but also be proactive and work on the right things at the right time. So yeah, hopefully try and use those as opportunities for lessons, I suppose.
Thank you. Yeah, because I do know, obviously, there's been the Tairāwhiti group working in the space too. So I just think more jobs are being created, just finding people to take the job on. But, thank you.
I think the other thing to add is it's quite exciting that other, particularly tangata whenua, are really ramping up with efforts in the spaces of working with biodiversity, and the passion is really driving things to probably take over some of the things that traditionally national and local government might have led, and we've got more buy-in in the community at large, as opposed to rule makers saying you must do this. It's more about the community going, we want this to happen, and this we'll make it happen, sort of thing. So yeah.
Thank you very much for the report. It is something that I'm really quite keen about. I just think under your strengths and opportunities, etc., on page 60, I really do think landowner interest and support is missing from that. You won't get anywhere, and you have both Maori and general title landowners who are really supported to conservation, and they aren't mentioned specifically, and I think they need to see that they are. We've talked about our council's project, so independently, I think landowners should be recognised as a strength to an overall project, and also it's silent on QE2 covenants, which have been around for 30 years. That's another private initiative, and whenua rahui initiative, so the protection of Maori land. So I think both of those should be noted as strengths, because that is really important. And if you want to buy in from the community, we do need to give indications that we appreciate the work that's done already. And they are covered, they are involved in PMAs, and some have had their properties resurveyed. So some of us do know a bit about what's going on. So I'd really like to see landowners noted as a strength, and the QE2 covenants. With respect to the challenges, and you do make the point in several places, but it's come to my attention recently that this council stopped the publication of the conservation quorum and has only put it online. And I would dare suggest that that would pick up, and is a great place to provide, we say lack of communication and coordination between organisations. There's an opportunity to deal with that. Lack of plans and strategies, lack of awareness in the community and issues facing biodiversity. What better document than the conservation quorum to be writing about these things? and a lack of resources within council for supporting landowners and groups. Well, we can't necessarily fix that, but good comms, and not just online, as I said yesterday. Landowners actually like to pick up something and read it sometimes. They don't want to have to sit at a screen when you've been working physically for 10 hours a day. It doesn't rock your socks to sit at a screen to have to read something. They might sit down, pick up the Conservation Forum that's always been really well supported. And it really disappoints me to see that we made a decision without any reference to council to stop that hard copy publication. I've got lots of them at home from the years that we have produced them, and they have got really, really good material provided by good people in the community, many of our staff who are doing work in that area. And that builds the reputation of the individual staff member too, and the landowners will see that individual working in a particular area. It's a great opportunity to profile some of the successful applications that have been made and are profiled later in the document. So I just think there's some things we can do without much cost that just help to get this project, which is really important, to give it a bit more credibility. So I hope you can listen to some of that.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really good report. Thank you. My question's around pest control, both flora and fauna, and how that's going to be paid for, given that this is sort of supposedly the council-owned lands that you're looking to manage across, along with, you know, associated landowners, neighbouring landowners, if you like. How are we going to nail the pests, and with what funding?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for your question on that. I guess this plan is, there's some projects which are already funded, which are mentioned in it. Some of that future pest control is yet to be funded, as in to find the funding. So I suppose it's not, the plan is not implying that there's going to be a whole lot of funding and new projects. It's more about this is a bit of a stock take of where everything sort of fits together. So, and I guess outside of the scope of this plan is the biosecurity team. So they already do a lot of pest control. Yeah, it's really about, I think, strategizing a lot of how do we, where should we be working, and where can we make a difference, and where can we sustain control of pests, of pest plants or pest animals. So it's sort of a, does that answer your question? It's sort of, we're not making big promises about what we're going to achieve in the pest control space. We're just saying, these are where we're making a difference. We're focused, got real focus areas. And then there's room for opportunity in the future if and when new funding arrives. So, yeah.
Yeah, it does answer my question, because I mean, it's people tend to think that the pests are all outside of the city limits. There's a wealth of possums live in the city as well. So, yeah, all of your parks and reserves are basically getting hammered by them as well.
Jerry.
Thanks for the work that's being done in this area. I'll be honest, I found this quite difficult reading. I struggled to begin with to work out whether this was the actual plan or whether this was a report about the plan, and I kind of got partway through and went, oh no, I think it is the plan. And I think that's down to the way it's laid out, which, because things like objectives are or outcomes are stated before the objectives, the policies are before that. There's a huge number of policies, some of which I think are duplicates of one another, or at least very close. I think potentially we could make it an easier document for because you're going to be working a lot with other people to deliver this. We have a budget for biodiversity, but almost in its entirety, that is in 2 projects. So in reality, we need the community to pick this up and run with it. So I guess my main bit of feedback was to maybe put that in the front of our minds and turn this into something that potentially is a bit easier to negotiate in terms of what are our guiding, what are our guiding outcomes, what are our, at the center of it, who are we trying to mobilize? And to Pat's point, with the exception of the to Ropu Taiao, there's not really any mention of who else we'll work with. there's especially no mention, given what we just talked about with Kerry Hudson, of the fact that catchment groups and catchment plans are going to become probably all-encompassing in the region, especially once all the catchment plans have rolled through and been completed. And potentially they could be a game changer for the way that we do biodiversity, linking communities together and mobilizing them. So perhaps some mention of whether it's catchment groups or whether it's the existing biodiversity work streams that we have in the community. I don't know what kind of heading they need, but I think they kind of deserve a bit of a nod. But yeah, my main, I'm happy with the content. I found it difficult to negotiate, and given that most of this stuff is fairly familiar to me, I kind of wondered if it was a bit of an issue.
So through the chair, just to clarify. You can, Michelle.
Michelle. Through you, Chair. So this is an internal work plan that we are sharing with you today. So this is very much focused on the mahi that we are doing here and now as we lead up to the regional biodiversity strategy, which is in 2026. So the whole purpose of it is to help inform our biodiversity team, working in a connected way with our biosecurity and land management team, so Kerry's team. So they have fed into this process. So in terms of comment on the objectives and the way it's laid out, it really is for the internal team purposes and very much action focused. So I guess where we're heading with it, so I would say that the internal teams have provided comment. With respect to external engagement, we have outlined what we're doing currently in terms of external engagement. However, it hasn't been widely consulted on, given it's an internal work program, if that makes sense. So, so the real focus is to give us some clarity and transparency about where we're heading while we develop the regional biodiversity strategy in 2026.
Thank you. As an internal document, obviously you can have it however you like, really. I think it probably only matters when it comes to tables like this. If we're trying to understand what you're working to. And I do think with specific regard to the policies, if you're working to something that says, for example, where are we? A precautionary approach is adopted when considering adverse effects on Indigenous biodiversity. That is extremely broad. And to the point I raised in the definition yesterday, we have a region which head to toe really proliferates with manukau, which is Indigenous. And if you have new staff members coming in and picking up this policy, then if they're working to it, that doesn't discriminate between, what is common Indigenous plants versus ones that are comparatively, more desirable to enhance. So does it matter that our policies are so broad?
Through you, Chair, we also, just another note, and I appreciate all the comments that have come in, and I'm noting them down. This document is intended to be a live working document as well. So these comments, we can refine the document in version 2. That's no problem at all. So I'm happy to take that feedback and incorporate it into the next version. The intention was really to get something in place that we felt was an appropriate level to guide the direction, but get it in place now so that we have something to work to. So I appreciate that we may have further versions.
Okay, Bill. All right, sorry, Andy. Andy was first.
Thank you. For me, outcomes page 52, outcome seems to describe some sort of endpoint description, but I'll struggle to get my head around outcome 4. Prosperity is intrinsically linked with a thriving biodiversity and significantly more than ever before. And then when I sort of went a bit further on to try and get the description of what that might mean, it says the description is integrate biodiversity protection principles in council policy and practice. So I guess I've got the more standard description of prosperity in my mind when I see that. When we say it's an internal document, perhaps there's a different way of looking at prosperity, but it didn't seem to I couldn't see that outcome described really. I couldn't sort of see where it was going.
Or through you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's probably, there is a bit of a document like this, there is that challenge between looking at some of the high level direction and the low, more in-depth stuff and people's interpretation. I suppose, as Michelle mentioned, that this is version 1, so there's that opportunity to kind of really unpack and repack things to make more sense or clarify things that someone reads as you've said. Prosperity means different things to different people. So yeah, I think it's a really,
Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 58, the local retire. You see the makeup and how they report into road typical, road water. And then if you flip the page, Te Tairāwhiti has been established to providing overarching governments to biodiversity across the region. Where I sit, council is the lead agency. Farmers and landowners in general are more conscious about environmental issues and biodiversity than most of us sitting in this room. And for them not to, I heard both Pat and Terry talk about the lack of putting to them. I don't think, well, this is a very good document. I don't think the network in terms of talking to people and specific groups has gone wide enough. Perhaps I should leave it at that before I get myself into trouble.
Thank you, Bill. Terry.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to follow on from that, you know, and it also goes to page 66. I mean, how wide scoping is the group, and is it just sort of trying to satisfy one sector, and where do the farmers all sit in this?
Through you, Chair, just to clarify the question is
So just, well, where is it? Yeah,
page 66.
58, right. I mentioned 58, then to page 66.
so what's the question?
So I just want to understand, you know, how wide the sector group is. It's been set up, and does it include farmers, or is it just type?
Through the chair, you're referring to Te Tairāwhiti.
No, the objectives one.
That's on page, so the reference was page 58. And then the other reference being Mana Whenua on page 66.
Yeah.
So firstly, Te Tairāwhiti is a group of officials that have responsibility of funding investment in this space. So it's about prioritize, like coordination and visibility over the different investments going into the biodiversity area. So we've got NPI, MFE, ourselves, Tairāwhiti, I think, are on that Mana Whenua. Also, other PVCs represented, as well as the
Environment Centre, yeah.
So that group has been set up as a coordinating collaborative body, because there's been a lot of investment that's come into the region for these types of projects.
Right.
And in terms of objective 1 around the Mana Whenua relationship part, that is purely about the giving effect to our relationship as our responsible relationship as Te Reti partners that we have been outlining and talking about. So that specifically focuses on that relationship around Mātauranga Māori and Apū, which is why that is the focus of that. So in terms of the other areas around, when you're asking where farmers are involved in that process,
well, through the chair, I suppose again, it's still this internal action plan, so it's sort of an opportunity to start from something that and build on that opportunity with a document. And yes, I think further down the list in terms of objectives, landowners are mentioned, and it's probably at the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses is where I take on board what Councillor Seymour has said, that there's that ability probably to make it more visible in those in that section of, given the scope of who should be, where the opportunities lie, it's probably looking at as a forward-thinking process rather than this document addressing those things. Yeah, fleshing it out, yeah, there's probably room for.
Further to that, Objective 4 talks about engagement with landowners and the community and key stakeholders in identifying, protecting and enhancing biodiversity. So there is a real intention that that's a core part of this team's focus. So we have noted the comments around landowner and farmer input, so we can update that in the next version as I've mentioned, but it is a real focus of ours to engage with the landowners about the future.
Your Worship, did you want
to make a comment? When I read this, Don, thank you for a wonderful, and I love the picture on the front as well. And when I read it, I thought, what a thorough piece of work this is, with everything. And as councillors, we'll be looking at the charts that you follow and the work that you do in the next while, and checking in while I assume, I couldn't find the timelines here, but I assume as we work on our strategy going forward, that work would be coming back to council. We'll input into that, work with our partners, and over these next 4 years, as we follow this and work on the strategy, there'll be regular check-ins.
Through the chair, this document, towards the end of the document, has some charts with time years, and that's probably where it gives that overview of how it's going to pan out for timing and staggered arrival of various pieces of work. Yeah.
Thank you for a very comprehensive work plan. Has been moved and seconded?
not yet.
I'll move it.
Second one.
Cool. So I think the context, just want to highlight the reason probably for these questions on what is, obviously there's a lot of information in this document. The context is that it doesn't discriminate between who actually has the land. Going forward, the rules are going to mean that everyone who has land has vastly higher expectations on what they will deliver for biodiversity. And so for the plan probably not to give enough weight to just how much the community is going to have to deliver, and the way in which potentially we might be engaging or supporting that is probably why you've had so many questions on this, is because we literally had a workshop on it. It was in the conversations yesterday. So yeah, just a bit of context.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved by Your Worship and seconded by Councillor Cranston. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Okay, we'll move on to the update on projects funded by the Natural Heritage Fund 2021. Is Melanie here to? Thank you so much, Don.
Chairman, it's a really good report against the 100,000 that we increased our budget to, and well done to the landowners who've done the work from that fund.
Speak to it at all? Take it as read. Take it as read. Take it as read. Okay. Do we have any questions here?
Just a quick question. Have the applications for 2023 opened yet?
Through the chair, yes, they opened at the start of this week. Yep.
And has there been any uptake so far? Or?
I've had 4 so far, which is outstanding.
And the total value as a proportion of?
So far, 44,000. Yeah, so there's more to go.
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you for the lovely feedback on what is happening and how our community get involved. One question I had, and I think we asked it the last time as well, is just finishing the loop. Do you touch base again when something has been awarded to landowners? Because, and the only reason it caught my eye again, because I know one of these people very well, and I know that they have immigrated. So for them, you know, that work might not have been passed over to the people who bought the property. So I thought, is there some loop involved where we check in again?
Yeah, through the chair. For that particular case, it's been quite unusual in the history of the Natural Heritage Fund whilst I've been administering it. And that those landowners, when they applied to the fund, did not have any intention of leaving the property. Obviously, their circumstances changed. In that particular instance, I am planning to follow up with the new landowners just to see if they're aware of the work that was done and if they're interested in carrying that on. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Hey, Andy.
Yeah, thanks. It's just, do they have close off periods? Because two of them, like 11, I mean, the description is 2 large exotic trees have been removed along with felling and poisoning of other smaller willows, wattles and leaves, but it doesn't say whether that's the full scope of the job and the funding or whether it's a partial completed project. And the other one is 19, which says project not completed. So I just wondering the status of those two, whether, yeah.
Through the chair, the first point, the wetland project has been a long-term ongoing project. It is actually a QE2 block there. So the particular funding that they applied for was just for that work, but it is part of a longer term project. And the other case, the landowners still intend to do the work in the future. Unfortunately, they've fallen outside of the funding timeframes, but that's not to say that we wouldn't consider allocating funding to them again in the future, because it was considered to be a very worthwhile project that we would like to support. It's just that there were some very unfortunate circumstances in the last 12 months that meant they were unable to complete that work.
Yeah, I think when I read into them, when I see the number of trees that are getting planted and that, I do see them as longer term projects. So I was just a bit concerned that they had a annual plan, and if it wasn't met by that 12 months, then it was gone, because most of it's just partial funding anyway. There's, you know, it's not going to do the entirety of the work in most instances anyway. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Seymour, seconded by Councillor Sheldrake. All those in favour? Aye. Yeah, and thank you for that. Great to see that the Heritage Fund has been, the Natural Heritage Fund has been increased from 40,000 to 100,000, and the projects that it's enhanced has been fantastic, and the response from landowners to the applications has been great. So hopefully this fund will increase over time, and it'll be more beneficial to this region as that happens. So yeah, fantastic. But certainly a huge increase, and just want to acknowledge that input from the increase and the landowners that have been applying to it. So great to see. Okay, we'll move on to now. We'll have the Uawa-Hikuwai Catchment Scientific Bore Drilling Project completion. And that's on page 112. Yeah, we'll have that after. We'll have the museum update after that, and we'll have that followed by the Peel Street toilets at the end. Yeah, come up and sit there. I'll get some more. We'll get some more chairs.
Ora koutou, Tom Porter, Environmental Science and Monitoring Manager. Okay, thanks, Pat. Sorry. We've been to you a couple of times before on this project. It's really exciting. We went in and did some scientific bore drilling up in Uawa, where we previously didn't have any sort of information on the aquifers. And as part of our requirements under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, we need to have a better picture of all the aquifers. And the good news is we did that, and we drilled, as the paper says, 11 bores, of which we've converted 4 into permanent scientific monitoring bores. So my environmental monitoring team will go up a couple of times a year to look at the sort of quality in the bores and get that picture. And that's really important going forward for things such as levels of salinity for climate change, and we're noticing whether that's increasing. And obviously it's really important for the local community to know the state of their water and how much they have it. But the really exciting thing about this project that's been sort of going for really 2 years now is the fact that I feel we truly did it in partnership with the members of the local community, two of which we have the very privilege of joining us today. And Anne Maguire, I'll introduce, will be giving a little presentation to us, and Maria Tamanui will be assisting her with that. And I'd just like to say a mihi, firstly to Josh Havel, who used to work at GDC, I think has spoken to you all before, who's now moved on from council, but he was a big funding, driving point to this, the success of this project. And also Rina Kerekere of the local community, who sadly can't be here today, but she did a great thing. And I'd just like to first, before we get into it, just take a moment, please, to remember our dear friend who we wouldn't have got this project done without him, but he, Gerald Pui, who sadly passed a few weeks ago. So if I could just ask us all just to take a moment to remember Gerald. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to take any questions on the kind of council aspects at the end, but if you could please just over to you, Anne.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui, kia koe rehet, me Auntie Pat, and ngā mihi nui kia koe te whanaunga Nadine. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm going to get straight into the presentation, and as you can see on the screen, Mere and I represent Tairāwhiti Mana Kaitiaki. Okay, it's a group that's been going for about 30 years now, dealing with resource management issues in the Tolagabai Uawa area. And the picture you see, of course, is our awa, Uawa Nui, Aruramatua, and Titirangi in the background. So two important resources for us as Hauiti. Moving on. Better do it, Tom. I don't know how to work those things. Okay. How did we work together with council workers, with councillors, and with Tom and his team, Josh? You'll see that we have 7 representatives down the bottom there sitting on Tairāwhiti Mana Kaitiaki. We have a governance representative who signed with the mayor the memorandum of understanding. Okay, and our current governance representative is Totini Glover, and he worked with council and with other groups that were part and parcel of this whole project. And through him and the various relationships that we have coming down to the 7 representatives, and it was our job to take the message about the drilling, about the freshwater to the iwi, to the hapu, to the whānau of Tolagabai. And so all round throughout the whole project, it was a great consultation process, and a process that we were all involved with. And so we felt that it was worthy of us giving up our time to work with council on these freshwater issues, but also the science of it all, and to share our knowledge, both the historic knowledge and the science, the mātauranga Māori. And I'm not very good at writing down mātauranga Māori, but I am good at talking it and sharing it, which is what I'm hoping to do with you today. So this was the first site that was where drilling took place. A really historic area, an important area today. It houses the Mangahea 2D Incorporation. which has been farming since the 1930s. But more importantly, it was the home of the families that supported Tairāwhiti or Wharewananga, which was opened approximately or circa 1475. Okay, and in the hill in the background, in the second photo, that's where the pa existed. And if you drive along Parwell Road, there's that hill goes all the way down, and all along that hill is the pa site. That's where my whānau lived. It's where I grew up. And so hence the name Pārua, okay, the long village. It was occupied even before the Rāwhioro opened, but became important because the people who lived in that pā were the gardeners. Okay, they fed the students at the wharewananga. And so all the flat land in front of that, those pā sites, were marakai, were food gardens. Okay, the important thing about living up there and also on the gardens is how did they irrigate? How did they survive with water? Okay, mainly from the river, okay, the Mangahoa River, but up in the hills we have the springs, and that was the drinking water. That was the water that the people used to survive, okay? The gardens below were fed from springs as well, or wells, and from the river, okay? So really important site. Tairāwhiti is further around the corner. We did try to do a drill around the Rāwhioro site, but we found gas and it just wasn't safe for the drillers to drill there. So we pulled out of there and Pārua became the first site. Okay, this is the Mangatuna site, which is across the river from Pārua. So those hills that I was talking about, you can see them in the background. And the trees in front is where the river is, okay? So this is across from Pārua. Mangatuna was also important at that time, from 1475 onwards, in that there was also marakai there, gardens there. And interestingly, Mangatuna, this particular site, we've only had that, brought that back in the last 5 years, okay? And that site, amongst other sites across the river, we lost around 1874 with the New Zealand Settlement Company. So gradually, we're getting them back, we're buying them back, and we've bought this site back and a lot of the sites that you see across the river now, okay? So once again, food gardens and being farmed as part of Pārua or Mangahoa 2D. Okay, this is across the river again and going up State Highway 35 towards Anora and Tokomaru Bay. Once again, this was an important site. It was actually a battlefield. Where you see that maize growing and the green grass on the right was a battlefield between Hauiti and Norfolk Carter. Okay, and on the site, you've got two urupa, two cemeteries, okay, and there are mounds on there. And people keep saying, why don't they pull those mounds down and grow? The crops are growing around the mounds. But I think that farmers in the past have tried and decided they better leave them alone, okay? The sad thing about wharekākā for us is that we still don't own it, but it was gifted by our tipuna after the Second World War for rehab funds, And the sad part about it is that none of my tipuna who fought in the 28th Māori Battalion, none of them were balloted onto those farms. There were no Māori farmers at Wharekākā. So it's a bit of a sore point for us, okay? Because that history is still sitting there. Yeah, they're all dairy farms. Yeah, even at Tairāwhiti, where I live, where I was brought up, those were dairy farms as well. Remember that we had a butter factory in Tolaga Bay, and we used to get blocks of butter like that, and they got hung in Muslim cloths into the well to keep them cool. Yeah. Waipuripuri, we go back across to Pāro here. The Waipuripuri site was right beside the river. Now, not far from this site, about 100 metres coming back this way, was Te Kania Takiro's musket pā. Okay, he befriended a man called Te Wera Hauraki, who gave him guns. And Te Wera Hauraki was from Ngāpui, down at Mahia, and Te Kani brought him up to Uawa, built the pā, and I can remember myself and another tutor from the Polytech taking students up, and we said, and that's Te Kani's musket pā. And one of the students said, what's a musket pā? And Victor Walker goes, must get out of here, must get out of here. The pā no longer exists because of flooding, okay? But Waipuripuri is important in that the hill that you see in the third photo at the back is what we call Taharangi. That was the last home of Te Rāwhioro Wānanga. And that Wānanga was closed around 1857. So if you think 1475 circa, up to 1857, that was after the signing of the treaty, that was after Lieutenant James Cook had visited Uawa. That was the last time of the Rāwhioro. The last tohunga was a man by the name of Rangiuia, and the Rangiuia whānau farmed that land down the Waipuripuri Road. It is now part and parcel of Hauiti Incorporation. Okay, so Hauiti Incorporation is the one where our maunga is, Titirangi. So we meet, the two incorporations meet. I have to say that the ownership is quite common between the two, right? So Waipuripuri, the interesting fact with that one was that the salination was right up the Mangahao River and the Uawa. So we're away from the sea, totally inland, and yet the salination is still quite strong. And I'm not a scientist, so that's for Tom and those, Alex and them to explain. Okay. But remember that from the 1400s up to the 1800s, those were marakai, those were food gardens. So the salination obviously didn't get that far up the river. So what's happening? That's what we need to find out from this whole drilling thing. Did you want to add anything there? Okay. Okay, next one. Thanks, Tom. Okay, Sandy Lane. Unfortunately with us, we can't get out of our old names. This is now part of Hauiti Road, but we still call it Sandy Lane. It's a bit like Tauwhare Pārai Road, people. We still call it Factory Road. Okay, and it's much easier to spell when people are. But Sandy Lane, where you see this photograph, is now part of the Hauiti Incorporation, and it's also the airstrip. And that was purchased back in the 1990s from the Irving family. The land was taken under the Public Works Act during the Second World War for sanitation purposes. Okay, and so that was where the night cart dumped everything on that land. And you see the row of trees behind us where the current camping ground exists, or holiday park. And they were all purchased together, okay? So that they came under the Hōtēnā Corporation. So gradually we've been purchasing land back. There's a stream, but it was so polluted that we're just working through that. And Uawa-Nui project that we've got going in Uawa is planting and trying to sift the rubbish from and out of the estuary, okay, as we call it, the Kaitawa estuary. And hopefully we'll get back some of the seafood, and that's pippies, oysters, we had there, mussels, of course. Mussels move across the bay onto the wharf, but that's something that we also have to deal with. People are using shovels to take the mussels off the piles of the wharf. And they're beautiful green-lipped mussels. We have to buy the Coromandel ones because of the way people are treating it. So that's the water, obviously, in the past came from the Kaitawa estuary. Now, the other strange thing about the estuary is we've got mangroves growing there, but they were imported into the area. They're not naturally grown there, but we do have a mangrove plantation in the estuary. And so people are sort of keeping an eye on it to see if it will survive with the restoration project that's been going on. Whew. So that's the Sandy Lane site. And I'm not sure of the science that was found there, but I'd say there'd be salination there as well, as it's so close to the sea. Yeah. Okay, golf course in Lockwood's. The golf course one is on the left. A lot of this land that I'm talking about was covered in native bush, and in order to survive, and people cleared the land, but the golf course and the Lockwood block on the right, on my right, sorry, was part of the sale of the township back in the 1860s. And the government agent that came in there was a man called Buckley, and he put up a plan for the township. He called it the Township of Buckley. But the government of the day wouldn't hear of it. Tolaga Bay was a name that was put on that place by James Cook, and so Tolaga Bay remains. Okay, thank goodness. The sale of that township was signed by 17 hapu chiefs or rangatira, okay? And they sold the township block for £500. And the reason that they did it is that because my great-great-grandfather and others were Te Kooti supporters. The Ringatu Church had gone to Uawa, and my great-great-grandfather, Tamihana Te Ao, was actually imprisoned on the Chathams with Te Kooti, and he came back to Uawa, and in order to save his land, Te Kooti persuaded him to change his religion from Ringatu to Anglican, the Mihinari. And so we've been Anglicans ever since. Although we still have a bit of that Ringatu still in us, yes. So that's why those two areas became really important. The golf course, of course, is owned by council. And the other interesting fact is that the Gisborne Cook Maternity Hospital is on the golf course, and that's now the club rooms. Okay, and they've just had the King of the Coast competition last weekend. The Lockwoods block is right next to the Uawa River. Okay, and currently my relation Joel Lincoln is got his feed jar farm on there, so we're letting Joel use the land, lease it, whatever, to see if feed jars will succeed as a crop, a cash crop. So once again, the salination found on both those blocks was really strong. So we're not finding or having much success with fresh water. Okay. Documenting and storing. This is Medes, baby.
I'm not sure if it's my space, but all of our space. I just want to reinforce what Auntie Anne has said in the sense that tangata whenua have played a real integral part in making this project successful in the streamlining engagements and relationships that we've been able to make within ourselves and with others, and sharing history that's able to validate and help Western science and what we seek out within the outcomes of these projects. It also aligns with our Treaty of Waitangi and the dual heritage that we share today, and in line with our Te Mano o Te Wai principles as well. In Mātauranga Māori, nothing is in isolation, as you just heard. Everything is interconnected. It's been a privilege to be a part of the operationals party, working alongside Alexandra, the geohydrogeologist, and reconfirming our existing intergenerational knowledge and the sense of understanding our young country and the lithology and the makeup of our blue-grey wacky soft soils. All of these help us to understand land practice and best practice, that we are able to put our best practices forward, knowing that water is not infinite. There are thresholds to the qualities of our lands dependent on the practices that we apply, that we are able to come to a common ground and understanding and moving forward together with best practice, basically. I just want to acknowledge Gerald again, Puhi Puhi, and being a stronghold within this project and being able to mobilise council as well as help open gates as well as close the gates, as that's a very strong part on a farm. I actually live on Parawa Farm as well. My partner's General Han. My children are from their tipuna from there. I am from Parawa Road, from Tairāwhiti. And my partner's from Mangatuna. We reside in the middle of these rivers. And we sort of understand, as our grandfathers have shared with us, our cultural indicators that actually influence what we are actually seeking out today. Our freshwater plans are due by 2024, which does apply a lot of pressure on us as a iwi hapu. But with these integrated streamlined relationship approaches, may we be able to get the most out of what we need to achieve to provide water for the future for our tamariki and our mokopuna and our children, and to share this amongst our communities. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you. Kia ora.
Last slide coming up, people. Okay. Now this, I included it because this was land that I was brought up on, where we had our dairy farm. And Thompson was my grandmother's family, and hence the name Thompson's Paddock, which we transferred to Mangahea 2D Corporation. And it's below the hills, below Parle, but it's, you might have to have a closer look at this one. I asked Gordon Jackman, who was an archaeologist, to come and investigate this piece of land, because I happened to be up in the forest with Pia Volson one day and driving down the hill, and I saw all these lines in the paddock. And the farm manager said to me that they were going to dig up the paddock and do all sorts of things. And I said, "Do we leave it alone until I get an archaeologist in here?" And what Gordon found was that, and he's drawn a diagram on the very far right of the drainage system, the irrigation system, where in wet times, the water could be drained through those drains out into the Mangahea River. And in dry times, we could draw water from the river into the drains to feed the crops. So that land has been cropped ever since the 1400s, okay, and is still being cropped to this day. And what I wanted to show you there was the science of irrigation that came from South America, of all places. Okay, now Gordon didn't have an authority, a heritage authority, to do a dig in those drains. He had to actually walk the paddock to get that diagram drawn. But the lines of the drains are very, very clear in those two photos. So what he did find, he did a test dig with a digger, and he found that one of the drain that he actually did dig into was lined with pumice. And his view was that the only other place that had seen such an irrigation system was in South America. Makes a lot of sense to me, because that's where the kumara came from. And I had Mark Horrocks, who's a microbiologist, come in and do some investigation as to what he could find that had been planted there. And he found mainly kumara. Okay, but then in the later years, he found the sweet corn, the beans, the maize. Mulberry was another one that he found of earlier times. So for me, the whole investigation with the drilling, even though this particular land wasn't part of that project, just around the corner, that it was important for all of us to see just how important that science was in terms of planting, gardening, irrigation, water use, and so on. And I think that Thompson's Paddock is a fine example of that. And that's where I'd like to leave it. Have a closer look at that, because you'll see the lines quite clearly. But thank you for your attention today and listening to me ramble on about my history.
Fantastic, that's really awesome. Do we have any questions for Annie or Maddie? Thank you so much, Annie. You were an Uawa encyclopedia, unbelievable. Anything about Uawa or our coast, we come to you and you've got that.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Josh, as well. Yeah, and Tom, fantastic presentation. It's a moving, noting report. So do I have a mover? Pat and Meredith. Yeah, moved by Pat, seconded by Meredith. All those in favour? Thank you so
very
much.
much.
No, that's awesome.
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to go around that way to say hello.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, we'll move to page 101 and we welcome Eloise from the museum, and we'll look at their annual report, Tairāwhiti Museum Annual Plan, right, 22 to 23, and the fantastic results. Welcome, Eloise.
Oh, kia ora, koutou katoa. Thank you for your welcome, and really happy to be here today to speak to our annual plan for Tairāwhiti Museum for the year ahead.
Right. Do you want to say anything about the plan to start with before I ask for questions at all? Or?
Sure, I can briefly. Just a few key things to note. Some great news. We were successful in getting a new contract over the line with the Ministry of Education for funding our education programs for the next 2.5 years, which is fantastic. The year ahead as well, we've got a lot happening behind the scenes. So some really critical upgrades to our IT and other assets. So not things the visitors will see, but are really important for our organisation. And a lot of that's been supported by grant funding and things we've been able to access through some of the COVID recovery funding that's come through the cultural sector. And we have great hopes for some further grants, which have just been announced for the year ahead to help us achieve some of our aspirations and build on the funding, the support we have through Council and Ministry of Education and other funders. We're doing quite a lot of work around collection care and access and renewals of our gallery spaces. We're quite excited about tourists coming back into the region over the summer, so making sure we're prepared for that, which will be a little bit strange having those cruise ships back in town, but making sure we're prepared for that and feeling really hopeful about what that summer ahead will look like for the organisation. So a lot of business as usual, but there's a lot of new opportunities out there and we're really obviously grateful for that continued the strength of the partnership with Council and with staff and with all of those organisations in the wider region as well, which are concerned with arts and culture and heritage here. So we are looking forward to the year ahead. So I'm really happy to take any questions that you have too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eloise. And it's, I'll just like to acknowledge the work that you and your team do down there at the museum. It's fantastic. It's an iconic part of Gisborne, Tairāwhiti and our tourist offer as well. But for locals, the knowledge that you guys do there is unbelievable. And, the art and craft and our history, it's a fantastic place. Yeah, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Any questions for Eloise? Yeah, Meredith.
Kia ora and thank you. I'm happy to move the report and always appreciate the delivery of it to us. Lots of good colouring and photographs, etc. But I just had a query just regarding the national touring space, because often it's frustrating when you miss something as just a person who was going to check it out. Do they come back again, or is that something you have to request? Like I was just thinking, some of them, you know, they're so fabulous that we get them come to our place, and you know, we really appreciate your work in this space. So with the national stuff, do you have to like put in like for them to come here, or is there a process that makes it, you know, easy or difficult to get them to come back?
Yeah, it's national touring exhibitions. There's a whole network of us all around the country, museums and galleries, and we're all working together. Some of us produce exhibitions, some of us are recipients of exhibitions. A lot of us are working on 3 to 5 year timeframes, and we're managing quite carefully how these exhibitions move around the country, and obviously for us to make sure it's cost effective in terms of transport, because transport insurance are some of the biggest costs that we might incur when having incoming touring exhibitions. So for us, in terms of budget, you know, we can usually manage to do 1 to 2 a year. So we're looking at proposals which we feel are a really good fit with you know, of interest to the community here. And then we build out that program with locally generated exhibitions. So affordability can sometimes be an issue for some of the larger exhibitions, which are maybe generated by the metropolitan, you know, more of the metro museums, but often we work out special arrangements or we can speak, you know, seek sponsorship or funding to support that. And also just being able to deliver some projects within the limitations of the building in terms of space and environmental controls and all those sorts of things are a consideration too. So generally, you know, the touring periods are quite limited and we have our slot. So getting something back again is hard or probably wouldn't be a priority. So the key message we want to get out there for the community is actually, you know, follow what we're doing. It's a real active changing program. You've got to visit multiple times a year, you know, so.
Okay, any more questions? Kerry?
If you don't have a second, I'm happy to second the report. I guess my question was just, I noticed that the gap between income and expenses is widening. And obviously that's not something that's ideal. How long can that be sustained and how at the moment would you plug that gap?
It's great you spotted that, and it is like any organisation at the moment, you know, costs are rising across the board in terms of all aspects of museums operations, all aspects of our deliverables. That budget is very much a baseline operational budget based on those confirmed funding sources. So we work really hard as an organisation to find grants and sponsorship, work with the Friends of the Museum, work in partnership with, you know, to try and fill that gap. But it is something we're watching really closely because that that level of input and output needs to be sustainable in the long term. So it will be interesting to see how we work over the next three years and how that's looking in terms of the pressures and the costs that are coming to bear on the organisation, particularly around the ageing asset and infrastructure aspect. Yeah.
Very.
Yeah, thank you. How's the leaky roof?
Yeah, the roof. Yep. No, look. So we're having ongoing. We haven't had a leak for a while. Where you know we you know we and then you know so we're always watching, and we are, and as you'll know from previous from meetings, that we are working closely with council at the moment in renewing the lease and the contract for services between Tairāwhiti Museum and the council. And a key part of the thinking behind that is how do we work in partnership actually to ensure that we have an asset that's fit for purpose. We've got an active maintenance program and that we're not dealing with the risk of a leaky roof and this priceless collection of taonga that we hold within. So it's top of mind.
Yeah, my question was just following around from Kerry's, you know, understanding obviously you see the shortfall. Mine was around the expenses from 22 to 23, just with inflationary pressures. I see that the expenses budgeted for have only gone up by about 1 or 2%. Are you kind of expecting to have some overall savings, or has it taken into account like the inflationary pressures around?
Yes, so that is what you're seeing is a squashed budget. That is me really working really carefully on the budget and what our outgoings are. So we're not, in some places we're trying to spend less money. So we're working within narrower constraints all of the time. So actually the support that we can find from other avenues is really increasingly critical to us being able to deliver this level of service that we're outlining, and many of those special projects and things that make Tairāwhiti Museum special, the support from council, from our community, is the foundation and enables us to go for those grants and those sort of things that really allow us to build on top of that. So it's a real balancing exercise.
Yeah. So overall a reduction rather than the last year plus. The other question I just had around the education side of it. So I can see the education costs have gone up by 24 budgeted, which probably wages.
That's right.
Is there more support available from Ministry of Education around that kind of stuff? Like, do they see value in helping to fund those increased costs?
So the short answer there is that there's not increased support at the moment, but it's something we're working really, really hard to try and change the frame on this, because we've actually had the same level of funding from the ministry since 2010 now. You can imagine actually the costs have doubled. So at one time they were completely funding our service, and now we're really struggling because we actually want to keep all of those things that allow a lot of access and equity. For example, making the programs free for everyone, being able to travel all around the region rather than being kind of locked in the building. Those are really foundational principles for us. So at a national level, there's a lot of discussion with the Ministry of Education and Manatū Taonga going on, particularly with the new New Zealand Histories curriculum and the demand and the changing demand from educators in our region. So
yeah, because it does save them a lot of time and money in the long run. So it'd be good to see them see the value in it and actually pay for that value.
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, you wish.
I'll just quickly say thank you as well, Eloise. You, like lots of organisations in Gisborne, or lots of sport clubs or stuff we do, we often punch well above our weight, and the same for our museum. It might be small, but what do they say? Dynamite come in small packages. So just thank you from all of us as well. I attend every now and then new exhibitions there, and one that was really striking was the Anne Frank's one. And thank you. I know you're competing with lots of bigger places to attract exhibitions to our place. So thank you from all of us on behalf of everyone here who enjoy that. And for us, it's for free as well. We never should forget that. Thank you a lot for the wonderful exhibitions that come our way. I know it's not always easy, but we really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been there's a noting report. It's been moved by Councillor Hiller-Brown and seconded by Councillor Warstock. All those in favour? All right. Thank you so much, Eloise, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you for all your time and wonderful feedback, which I look forward to passing on to my team. Kia ora.
Okay, we'll move on to our most favourite subject. The Peel Street Public Toilets update. So it's on page 91. Okay, welcome, Diane. We'll leave it to you to keep us informed to start with. We've all read it as well, but if you want to add to anything.
Kia ora koutou. Through you, Chair. Yes, Peel Street toilets is a topic that has been discussed for a number of years. So please bear with me while I surmise what's in the report here and identify some key points from a staffing perspective, and then open it up for questions. So in August 2020, the Operations Committee made the decision for us to re-strengthen the building. And with some urgency. Unfortunately, at that time, we did experience delays and struggled to commission the work. So following the 2020 decision, the design at that time and during the window of time between 2020 and 2022 was refined. Staff met with you in the councillor workshop to address progress that had happened or lack of progress between 2020 and 22. And at that time, councillors requested more information in regards to the legal information as an approach to ensure due diligence had been undertaken. May I carry on? There's a hand raised.
No, we'll wait till the report. Wait till Diane's finished, and then we'll take questions.
So following that further information and presenting that back in a public excluded report in June, Council Laws requested that while there was some information in that report which could potentially waive a legal privilege, that the majority of the report could be received in an open forum. So this information is presented back to this committee in an open forum, recognising the community interest in the Peel Street toilets for a number of years. A couple of key things that I'd like to point out is that we are on track to progress to June 23. We've engaged Architects 44. That was actually back in 2020. The design has been refined slightly, so it's less fussy, and we have had quality surveyor costs to support that it can be delivered within the existing budget. But I wanted to point out that it will not include an Exelou as a standalone within this project budget, and nor is it required, but that the project budget is strictly for the re-strengthening, that there is a small amount of finishing work that would need to be undertaken to enable the building to reopen as a public convenience. Over the next year, while this project is, while the building is being re-strengthened, there will be the opportunity for council staff to work with interested parties to look at potential funding to refurbish the facility, but that is outside of this report and this remit. But I wanted to acknowledge that there is some keen interest from Historic Places Tairāwhiti and others to see that facility refurbished. Also internally, as part of a public convenience rationalisation process under the community facility strategy, staff will be assessing the needs within the CBD and that will help inform any potential future funding for refurbishing should the Peel Street stack up, as we suspect it will. That's it from me. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Diane. Very interesting, to say the least. Tony.
Yeah, I want to see how many sanitary style puns I could throw. I want to move this paper. This take has been around long enough. We could almost call it a movement. I like that about things stacking up. That's pretty well done there, Diane. And let me see, what else can we do? Look, a few points. So the paper talked about supplementing CBD access by not potentially charging for the other wharepaku, and that cost was notably 3K, but this is going to be finished in June, which is essentially a year from now, so we're essentially going to say goodbye to almost 6K.
Through the chair, we wouldn't look to close this facility until January, so it'd be 6 months roughly.
All right. And the other thing was, I will come back to it, Mr. Chair, if I remember what the point was.
Andy.
Yeah, no, I was going to suggest throwing out the 20 cents because even though it's 3K, there's probably some expense to collect that 3K with machine maintenance, or, you know, there's probably, so it's probably not even 3K. So yeah, I'm quite happy to see that to go, and it could be on a permanent basis for what it's doing. The other thing is the refurbishment aligned to any potential improvements if Historic Places Trust did come along? It's not something they'd have to rip out to do what they may do. I think it's unlikely that they will do something there, but in the circumstance that they may, is a refurbishment something that's going to allow anything that may happen in the future?
Through you, the chair, the refined design is basically a steel structure or beams within the building.
Yeah.
So it would enable refurbishment much more so than the previous design, which sort of relied on an Exelou sitting within the structure of the building. Yeah.
Seems a lot of money for something that can come out relatively easily. Thanks.
Okay.
A second.
Okay, Debbie.
Thank you. I just wanted to add the port toilets to the list of toilets that the community can use while that is closed. So it's just not in here, but it's certainly my first choice to either walk or drive over there. Yes, that's just another option.
Okay, any other questions? Well, microphone, mate.
Through Chair. Thank you, Diane, for all the work you've done. This has been a bang the head against the wall project for the last 10 years. You came along and there's finally some movement. I hope my colleagues are listening. At least we're going to refurbish it, not pull it down. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, certainly nice to see that there's options there to continue it as a toilet as well down the track. So rather than just re-strengthening and having to close it down. I don't think anybody thought that was such a great idea, although it was our only option at the time. So to see it now having an extra lifeline on it is a, excuse the pun, is great to see. So yeah, we'll got it moved by Council. Oh, do you want to say something now? You've remembered.
Record it was. You spoke about trying to find some funding to then actually take it into a toilet. What I really want to do is urge this council and the new iteration of council is that it is done in a timely fashion, that we don't wait until it's strengthened in June next year and then we start looking around for funding to make it a toilet, because that really does kind of defeat the whole purpose.
Thank you. Okay, it's a noting report moved by Councillor Tony, moved by Tony Robinson, Councillor Robinson, and it's seconded by Councillor Wasnop. All those in favour? Carried. Okay, 12 o'clock, we'll stop for lunch and we'll have public excluded after lunch. We'll be back at 12:30. Is that long enough for everyone?